Welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to hear is the audio from an event that took place in London, Theory Underground's second to last stop on the American Idiots Tour in May of 2024. We had an amazing turnout and the vibe was charged with a kind of energy that can only come from when some nerds want to talk about things, but people, or at least some people, want them to shut up about it. There was no drama, though someone did throw something against the window of the venue from outside, but we suspect it was just some teenagers fooling around. This was an opportunity for the Theory Underground crew to collaborate with Nina Power and Helen Rollins. Nina has come under fire recently, and I wrote an article on Substack about it that you can check out if you care, but none of that should be too relevant to the conversation that we had. I mean, it shouldn't be, but the significance of certain moments, much less the fact that this event happened at all, will be lost on people who lack a familiarity with the cultural field of intellectual production today. That's fine. And welcome to you too. Don't worry. You'll get a feel for it eventually. We'll just get right to it though. So this one's about anti-intellectualism. Anti-intellectualism is a huge problem, but it is arguably only symptomatic of bigger issues. The question of this event is about the causes of anti-intellectualism.
I think the surplus genius is that.
I hope you will enjoy it as much as we did. If you are interested in Theory Underground, in the publications, courses, or ongoing research seminars at TU, then make sure to watch the PSA at the end of this episode. We've got some exciting news towards the end. Okay, and with that, we'll get right to it. Enjoy. Oh, also, really quick little note. There was all kinds of complications getting venues all across the tour at multiple locations. I even had people threatening to cancel me at one point, and so I went ahead and just cut off one city altogether. But when it came to organizing this event in London, it was pretty hard to find a spot, and I just have to shout out Verdurin, which is the space that this took place in. Thank you, Pierre, for making it happen.
So the introduction after the kickoff. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Pierre Delancey. I run with Benjamin Devon. I run Verdurin, which is the place you are at now. And I'm going to try to introduce this project because I think at least half of you are here because of David and Theory Underground, and it might make sense for you to understand what this is. And also partly because I think it might kick off some kind of questions. So Verdurin, Madame Verdurin, is a character in Proust's novel In Search of Lost Time. She runs a literary salon. She's a little bit manipulative, she's a little bit silly, and there's a kind of class element. There's a bit of class climbing in how she runs her affairs. She has a posse of the faithful. Welcome, you are now all the faithful here. And something happens. Bourgeois society establishes itself, reproduces itself through culture. And this is the kind of thing that when I was young, I thought happened at the dinner table. This is what my mother, with her pretensions of grandeur, said would wait for everyone. And I, earlier today, was kind of having a heart-to-heart with our guests and saying that all I ever wanted to be when I was a child is to be a public intellectual. Where on earth would one do such a thing? Well, we do it in places like this, which is one of the things we want to discuss. So very briefly, to explain where you are. Verdurin is a project space for art. You see like fragments of an exhibition behind you. This is work by a painter called Anna Sebastian. You see a bookshop with books that all kind of aesthetically and maybe ideologically skew somewhere. You will find here some beautiful foods, which go together with this experience. And if you happen to come in an evening, you will find events like this, and you'll find events that examine our political situation usually through questions of visual culture, but not only. So I gave you this introduction to essentially welcome you to a glorified shop, partly because this shop comes with a kind of political tradition, or at least a sociological tradition that I think this event might end up getting involved in. And this leads me to my first question. I'm not going to introduce you one by one because I'm afraid my memory is too terrible to be able to recite your CVs. I think I remember Nina. I know who you are. But you'll incorporate that into conversation after I've left the sofa. But my first question, having just loaded slightly in jest this position of culture and intellectualism as a preserve of a certain bourgeoisie of the 19th century, I wanted to ask about the kind of class position of your project as a project of kind of self-edification. And yeah, I wanted you to define a little bit what it is that you do for those who those who are here because of me and Benjamin, as opposed to because of David and co. So again.
Am I on this microphone? Cool. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Pierre, for putting this on. I'll make this part about what Theory Underground is pretty short, because we've been doing it every stop of the tour, and at this point I feel like we're beating a dead horse here, but there are, of course, people who don't know. So Theory Underground is my teaching platform, and it also publishes books. But it doesn't just publish any old books. It publishes specifically the work of myself and a handful of fellow travelers in my organic network, as well as students and fellow travelers at Theory Underground. And it is ultimately a vehicle for certain conversations and research threads that I did not feel like I could pursue in academia for various reasons. And we'll get into some of those, of course, and that is actually largely why we wanted to talk about anti-intellectualism today. But with that said, class background. It's a big deal for us, and it's, I think, as Pierre was pointing out earlier today when we were talking, he had read my introduction to underground theory over there, and he also read Nance and Anne's pieces, and the experience of class is one of the ones that you'll see in every one of those pieces. But it's a weird tension because we're very anti-workerist in a sort of sense, which is to say, like, anti-working class identity politics, right? You were talking about, what was the example you'd brought up of working class identity politics rearing its ugly head?
So the joke, which some of you might have seen on Twitter in the last few days, that working class stroked underclass is now this kind of, by the back door, has become a semi-protector characteristic. So we encourage applications from applicants who are black or women or one, but now you get to self-define as the underclass. So there is a question of what the underground means for you. The underground, and at least in your writing and my understanding, of course, is a kind of musical term, yeah, the kind of underground punk scene, which I honestly have absolutely no access to. But like the mixture of kind of undergroundness and underclass and class itself is, I think, useful as a part of your defining introduction.
Yeah. So the underground. We basically, wow, these chords are going to be an issue, I see. So as far as we're concerned, the underground for theory is something that comes out of the internet, it comes out of the blog sphere, it comes out of the sort of writing that people like Mark Fisher and Nick Land were doing back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Nina was there. She's a part of it, and we're kind of coming in on this thing. And if it wasn't for the work that they had done, which was to say, instead of sticking to just doing stuff within academia, they chose to also do stuff online. They chose to also do stuff publicly in some weird sense. It's not really public. It's whatever it is, the internet. We're still trying to figure out what this medium actually is. But the underground is where people we kind of just assume workers with earbuds, where they go for their education, right? And so my experience coming into the life of the mind really does start with listening to podcasts, and Joe Rogan talking about DMT and MMA, but then he would have on intellectuals of various stripes, and that was something I found so fascinating because I'd never had access to any kinds of conversations like that. And so, I'm stocking shelves, doing a graveyard shift gig with my buddy, and we're always talking about the podcasts we're listening to, and this is 13 years ago probably, And the nonfiction books that we started listening to were really just like self-help and business success kinds of books that people talk about on these kinds of podcasts, which for us seemed like wisdom or philosophy or something like that. Like this was the closest we could get to the thing, and I didn't know what the thing was until eventually college. And in college, I found out about philosophy, and I found out about Socrates and Aristotle and all of these things that I didn't know about before this sort of funnel into the life of the mind. And so, thankfully through my education at the university, I was able to get a lot more into philosophy and theory, but without certain people along the way and certain things that I listened to along the way, it probably would have just gone off into conspiracy theory and sort of this sort of conspirituality side of the internet that I was in for a while, and so that's where I'm coming from is to say, like, I do have now like some academic education, but I don't feel at home there, and I don't see a future there. I'm teaching a course this fall. Ann is as well. We both teach at Boise State University part-time, but we haven't for the last several years. We're just getting back into it. Ultimately, having a foot inside of that world and a foot in this underground is a really interesting thing to be doing. And we don't valorize it. We don't think that the underground is like inherently cool. We don't think it's something that people should aspire towards. It is what it is. And what is it? And as far as we can tell, it's a scene, like any other music scene or art scene, which is fine. Scenes are fine unless you think that they're genuine movements. And if you think that your scene is a genuine movement when all it really is like a scene, well, then that would be a problem for you. But as long as you take it for what it is and realize that it's just like a scene, then cool. But then the question is, well, what can we do with that? Can we do something with that? And our goal is to go from being a scene to an intellectual milieu and theorizing the conditions of possibility for that to even occur. And so I want to probably let each of you say a couple things about that, about class and the underground. And I want to turn it over to Nance first here, because at the end of the day, both of us spent significant portions of our lives in two different music scenes. Both of us have some kind of a debt to this kind of punk music that you were talking about, to bands like Minor Threat and Black Flag doing what they did back when they did it. So the question is, what did they do? Why do we feel some kind of a debt to them? And at the same time, see it as a problem and see that as not really a way forward, right? So self-critique kind of comes with it, but yeah, here you go.
I think using the term underground, we kind of do it tongue-in-cheek. We kind of do it in a self-deprecating manner. I have no choice but to work in the underground because I don't have access to the academy. I don't have access to universities. Economic conditions and poor choices that I made in my life have kept me as a worker, and I don't want to be a worker. I don't want to be a person who just goes on the internet and celebrates my lack. I really do want to try to overcome it, get educated. So it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's also like there's a part of me that does honor the underground scene and this ethos of seeing something that you are convinced needs to happen and doing it for yourself rather than waiting around for someone else to do it.
It's that DIY ethos, right?
Yeah, do it yourself. We need structures, we need systems that can support the type of study that I want to do and that Dave wants to do and that Ann wants to do, and rather than hoping someone will get a bright idea and do it, Dave took it upon himself to kind of create these things, and we're trying to climb out of the underground. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. I don't know. But it is this chip on the shoulder, kind of self-aware. I'm sorry that my boots are dirty, but I would like to come into your salon nevertheless.
I mean, this is just the history of kind of intellectual pursuits in many ways. Again, Madame Verdurin is a social climber. She does get to marry into the aristocracy. But I mean, maybe I do want to hear, would like everyone to hear from you as well, Anne, but you have climbed out of the underground. You're doing your rock star tour now. And this is kind of one of the other questions that I think we need to address as we start on, and because it really does some of the work for me, because it figures out what the value of 30 or so of you together with us being here, as opposed to on Zoom. What you've done the American tour of Europe. These guys have been having these kind of conversations for the last 2.5 weeks with people all over the place. And how do you see that as actually building? Has it actually allowed you to take your thinking somewhere further, not just structurally, but I mean you've gave me some examples before of like encounters which are possible in person, but haven't been possible in person. And that particularly from that kind of position of the warehouse worker with earphones, where the encounter isn't there, it's solitary. You get to listen to Joe Rogan, you get to identify, you get to have a parasocial relationships. But any kind of classical idea of organizing through knowledge, you used, Dave, the word milieu, which is a kind of I think a cop-out. What does it mean? Is it more of the same, or is it actually a political platform now? What have you just observed yourself doing for the last couple of weeks, coming out from the underground into the rider, and the amount of heroin we had to get in today just to get these people alive? Dad jokes, okay. Go. At this point, I'll be finished, and I leave the sofa.
No, we will not let you leave. You're gonna stay. We'll turn the interview on you. We've done this along the way. No, a couple things really quick, and this is pedantic, but it does kind of help you. I think I'll understand a little bit about this underground punk DIY ethos. And I was never a punk. I never really saw myself as a punk. I thought I saw something. I think all along I saw some sort of performativity and like, oh, you're so radical. I always kind of saw that. There's also like some sort of inherent snobbishness to it that I found repulsive in the beginning. So I was much more like inclined towards the metal side of things, because those people seemed very like welcoming, and then later it was like metalcore, which has its roots in hardcore, which has its roots in punk, which is definitely like part of this American DIY ethos thing. But the thing is the reason I'm bringing it all back in is because this idea that this was like our big rock star tour. I just wanted to say that when it comes to this ethos, it's anti-rock star. It's very, very anti-rock star. Now, I'm not actually super anti-rock star. I'm not super anti-academic, but that is why we got people talking a lot of shit. One of the reasons, Nina's the main reason, but like one of the reasons people were talking so much shit on the Underground Theory volume. Oh, it's underground. Oh, you guys think you're underground, but you have Žižek included. And the point being, and McLuhan and Žižek both rock stars, right? And so the point is like you can't really be underground if you're doing stuff with rock stars, can you? And we refuse this. Like if you were a rapper, and I don't know, Kendrick Lamar wanted to collab on your like EP or one of your singles that you're putting out, are you no longer underground because you let him on? Like that's so stupid. That's just so stupid. And this is the sort of authenticity gatekeeping bullshit that the punks get into that we hate. But the idea, the DIY, do it yourself. Like the idea of like, well, we can fucking look. Speaking from the punk position in the 1970s, our parents sold out. Our parents joined the thing. They said that they were going to smash it. They were the hippies, and they think they're so progressive. And now they just go to these sold out rock arenas, and they get drunk and maybe do some cocaine. Oh, so radical, mom. So radical, dad. Well, their idea was like, we're gonna make music. We're gonna have fun, and we're gonna push the limits of the medium by doing what we can without even knowing how to do what we're doing. And so in a sort of sense, they lowered the bar. And they lowered the bar so low that it's like the worst music in the world in a sort of sense. But of course, like there's this element of like, but that's the point. So fuck you all. And of course, we want to push back against that element of it because we want to raise the bar that academia has lowered. And who are we to do that? Well, we're just a bunch of American idiots. It's not our place to do that. Nevertheless, we'll try and fail. I just said way more than I meant to right there. I was just setting this up to turn it over to you guys. But what does the tour do? I think that's the main question. And then we're going to turn this over to like the conversation you all came for. This is just the introductory shit. So we'll just say a couple things about what we think the tour actually does. We'll start with Anne, then go to Nance, and then we'll be on our way.
Yeah. One of our research interests at Theory Underground is critical media theory, so kind of understanding our relationships with devices. And one of these ideas that stemmed really early from that comes from Sherry Turkle and her book Reclaiming Conversation, is this virtuous circle, this idea of solitude and solicitude and how that's necessary in our own lives, and then thinking about our own kind of intellectual journeys, having solitude and solicitude. And so having, online classes and these online conversations that we've had with Nina and Helen and lots of other people in this room and outside all over the world have been amazing. Like, we love that the internet is this medium that can bring us together. At the same time, we hate the internet and we have our critiques of it. And so, I know Dave has just really tried to take this medium, the internet and Zoom and YouTube, and use it for our means, but then figure out how to go beyond that. And the touring was part of the going beyond, Let's actually get in our little minivan and drive around the country and meet the people that we've had conversations with. Let's get on a 9-hour flight and go to Paris to meet Cadell and come here and meet Helen and Nina to have these real conversations. And that can really only happen in person, especially the energy that comes from having an audience and getting to meet new people and see how tall everyone is and that's the main reason. We just needed to come out and figure out how tall everyone is. So no, I'm just kidding.
It's the main thing.
Yeah, and so we care about that. We care about the genuine connections, that real solicitude, genuine being with others that just can kind of be started by and aided by the internet, but can really only happen in spaces like this. And so that's, I think, ultimately why touring matters at Theory Underground and getting out and meeting real people.
You've got to build off that. And you got to say something about friction.
So one, I guess, tendency of I guess people like me when I was a worker, like a disgruntled, malcontent worker who thought I was smart and who thought I cared about stuff. I would just consume content. I would consume a BreadTube video, or I would half-ass read a book. And I would do it alone in isolation, and that would never go anywhere. That would never actualize in the world. It was just to satisfy me or to assuage my pitiful depression or whatever. And part of, genuinely thinking is to be able to confront contradiction and to be able to work through friction and to be able to deal with things that make you unhappy. And that's kind of impossible to do reliably in isolation. So creating forms of interaction with other people where you do have to deal with real life stuff. You do have to deal with microaggressions. You do have to deal with, just being sharing the same space with another person is real in a way that you can't simulate on the internet.
Your presence is a microaggression.
No, I apologize,
people are
everybody.
so hard to deal with. It's so much easier just to scroll, Scroll past that person. We'll just keep.
Yeah, you don't even have to cancel them anymore. You just don't ever look at them. And yeah, there's a large part of trying to raise the bar that you really do have to confront unpleasant truths. That's why it matters to get out and get around and seek out people that you trust and respect and want to learn with and from.
Yeah, smashing apart our delusions is part of it, because online you form conceptions of everybody, like me being tall or something like that. The goal is to smash that delusion, But that's just an example. It's an obvious example, but there's way more subtle ones, and this gets at the parasociality that Pierre brought up, and that as a worker with earbuds, you develop these parasocial relationships with these rock stars of the podcast sphere or the influencer sphere, and there's no way of developing any sort of back and forth there. There's no way in, and by keeping it small, keeping it tight, and keeping it focused towards specific research interests that come out of my engagement with my fellow travelers, people like Nance have an inroad to having a piece published in a volume with Nina and Žižek and Finkelstein and the rest. And so, you know, like that's and that's the thing is like, that's the most important part about what we're doing. This is like the meeting before the meeting, right? The real meeting is once you've read us and you've had time to think about it, and then if you actually want to engage, like maybe doing a course and potentially submitting something to one of the upcoming anthologies. And so the point is that there is a conversation that you can get involved with, but it's not one that has a low bar of admission. It's one that requires serious sacrifice and effort in terms of your taking on research, taking on the kinds of questions and thinkers and texts that we're engaging with. And that, I don't feel like that is something that you can just do like let's just say that you're watching, I don't know, Rick Roderick or David Harvey lectures on YouTube. That is impossible. You're not going to be able to do that. But this makes it so that it's not just possible. It's like, oh, it's a thing now. You go, like, you're just listening to this stuff, and then you see like the Underground Theory cover. It says coming to a city near you, and it's like, oh shit, like this might actually come around. And we have people who just come off of the YouTube side of things. And so a lot of you, maybe, I don't know, how many of you just know about Theory Underground off of the internet? If you're not afraid to show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. That's a handful. And then people come from Substack, people come from YouTube, people come from the podcast, whatever. Point is, it's just internet shit until it gets real. And we're trying to find ways of making it real where we're not just reliant on these platforms. The platform is not the platform. So that's the opening sort of remarks about like our approach to everything, how time energy relates. We'll get into that later. Because I think at this point, we really want to turn it over here to like, this is more of like a podcast meets academic panel. And this Underground Theory volume is part of basically a distributed conference. And Nina is actually in it, but also Helen joined myself and Nance for a conversation, was it like a couple days before we took off on the tour, right? Yeah. Very recent. What did we talk about? What didn't we talk about, right? And so, I don't know, maybe we're going to start this thing off, and I think we'll just start on this end of the room here with Nina and then Helen. The question is, what is anti-intellectualism? And this doesn't have to be exhaustive, right? You don't have to write, it's not like an encyclopedia post or something. But what do you take it to be, and how has it impacted you and your projects?
Okay, this is a good question. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to see you. How short you are in person.
I'm surprised it took this long for that joke to actually surface. It
was that joke. Very good joke. So I was thinking earlier today about some of the reasons why intellectualism or pursuing what one might be curious about becomes difficult. And one of those things is definitely fear. And as I was teaching in academia, I taught in academia for 13 years. And before that, I taught FE, which is 16 to 18. I taught at Orpington College with Mark Fisher, who you already mentioned. And I currently teach adult education, and some of my adult ed students are here, which is fantastic and much better to teach and to be part of than what higher education became, in my opinion, which was, and everything we fought against, which was kind of bureaucratic, centrist, business-oriented, and basically a way of getting middle-class people and upper-lower-class people into debt, keeping them out of the job market for 3 years, and then forcing them to pay back 50, 60K. And we were very involved in the student protests, trying to keep education free. I was the last cohort to have free education in 97 to go to university. It was paid for by my local authority. When I told my students that at Roehampton, they often couldn't believe it, that it was actually not even, well, it is long ago now, but it was in living memory, at least for me, that higher education, university could be free. And obviously, we lost that fee battle in 2010. When I was teaching at Orpington with Mark, and I was still finishing my PhD, I had literally no teacher training at all. I was basically copying Mark, who was a very, very good teacher. And the reason why Mark was a good teacher is because he did the single thing that I think education can do, which is transmit enthusiasm. And Mark was a very dynamic character. He suffered a great deal mentally. When he was on form, he was really one of the most astonishing, energetic figures. And he basically did this with the students. He transmitted enthusiasm for whatever it was that we were teaching, often bits of like religious studies AS or philosophy AS. And it was kind of difficult. FE college is not quite like sixth form college. It's not like a school. It's often people who struggled with formal education or have been expelled. Orpington is a very poor part of Kent. The college was in a shopping centre, not the most elevated place in the world. We were trying to describe things like the argument from beauty for the existence of God. You're surrounded by like empty chicken boxes and crisp packets. It was quite difficult. The struggle was real. But it's, yeah, how to put it? And out of that, I suppose, just to think about the pre-social media internet and what we were trying to do with the blogs, and actually with the early Zero books, was write books for our students. Actually, that's what Marx's capitalist realism was, and that's what my One-Dimensional Woman was. The idea was that we would try to basically make these things kind of exciting and explain something like capitalism to our students, who in many ways didn't really need it explaining to them, right? Like it was, in a way, it was a kind of dialogue. And I wanted to say that it's not really a surprise that Western thought, if you like, begins in dialogue, for precisely the reasons that I think Nance was articulating, but all of you really, that individual thought, like solipsistic kind of autonomous thought, is all very well and beautiful and speculative and a crucial part of our own development, but nothing happens without dialogue, without relationality. And I think this kind of individuating, kind of narcissistic world where everyone is projecting or encouraged to project and to be an individual without being a character, right? So there's no sense of development, there's only a kind of identity. And Pierre mentioned the fact that now being lumpen is now a identity, which, you know, why not? I used to joke about this with my artist friend from Yorkshire, that her working class accent, you know, is now a protected characteristic and a calling card in the art world. And of course, this is radically at odds with any understanding of economic exploitation, of class, of you know, any form of solidarity. I think the socialist movement took great strides in various countries to have a collective dialogic understanding of literacy, reading groups, autodidacticism, working men's library. You know, there is a whole tradition of people who didn't have time, basically, but had the will to learn, the desire to learn, and did learn, right, in spare time. You know, there is this kind of great tradition of this. And I think, you know, when we think about the Cuban Literacy Project, for example, you know, imagine people, how fast that happened, right, in Cuba. What an extraordinary project that was, you know, where you have people out on the street carrying gigantic pencils, you know, in sort of like fervent love and celebration of this cult of literacy. You know, how beautiful, how far past that we are, in a sense. You know, we're all literate, but we're all sort of hyper distracted and hyper individuated, individualized. So this question of fear, I suppose, was the one I was trying to get to. And I think there are many different types of fear. I saw this increasingly in my students. This is what I wanted to say. In the 13 years I taught in higher education, I was at work in the 90s. It was a bit crazy. I was there kind of slightly after the orgy. Nick Land had just left, or he's leaving during my first year. There were lots of people who'd gone to very strange places, intellectually, chemically, and otherwise. And I was having these crazy conversations at the age of 18 about matter, Spinoza, freedom, sex, whatever. It was a truly extraordinary time. As I went into teaching, I could see, especially in the last 2-3 years, the real impact, which we always said would happen, of the fees, how it affected our students who, many of whom were not rich, were not independently wealthy at all, who had to work as well as study, and this was cutting into their study. They were tired. Some of them had children. Some of them brought children to the class, which I didn't mind. Some lecturers were opposed to that. You could see how difficult it was. They were thinking all the time, unsurprisingly, of the debt that they would be in, how much their probably 2-1 philosophy degree from a not high-ranking university would be worth in the job market, which is very little. And it just became a kind of place of really, and I don't blame the students, don't get me wrong, this is nothing to do with them, this is about the material conditions, right? They were inhibited increasingly. At the same time, you had a kind of fear of being surveilled, of being censored. And this is one of the problems with dialogue, and especially with philosophy. In a way, you have to practice saying the wrong thing. You have to say stupid things. You have to rehearse arguments that are perhaps wrong. Perhaps we're talking about very difficult subjects like, I don't know, murder, crime, so on, things that are like very contentious. And there has to be, in the idea of the seminar, something like a permission to speak freely without judgment, right? That's not to say the arguments themselves can't be critiqued and refined. That's precisely the point. But in the first place, the content can't be something that is then taken and used against you as some definitive statement. And we just published a very interesting article in Compact from one of the editors about the relationship between private thought and public speech. And the way in which every statement that people are writing are now being treated, and I've had this happen to me many times, as like the final word, as something that kind of absolutely is what you think and what you think is wrong, and therefore you should be punished for this thing that you apparently think. And there's no sort of flexibility, there's no open-mindedness, there's no dialogue. Everything is treated as lapidary, which is a brutal world. It's a kind of a fearful world. And I suppose we have to come to a place where we are not afraid in some ways. And I don't mean this in a kind of banal free speech, people should say whatever they want, sure, but something more definitive as a practical project, which is to say when we have conversations, when we're in dialogue, that there is a kind of permission to take it slowly and to get things wrong and to refine one's position, which we all do all the time. And I think the opposite of fear in this sense is kind of curiosity. And it's curiosity that gets kind of smashed all the time. No, you can't think about that. No, you're too tired to think about that. No, you've got to focus on this boring job instead. And the internet, in this sense, like Ivan Illich, who I adore, who's this, very interesting kind of renegade Catholic kind of quasi-anarchist figure, talked way before the internet of these learning networks, right? So, and his idea was that people would write down on a piece of paper and like a little card, and they'd leave it somewhere. I want to learn about, I don't know, when to plant crops, or I want to learn Portuguese. And people would look at these things and they would pick it out. Now, I know how to do that, right? So like knowledge exchange and learning networks and so on. And really, we have this possibility with the internet, right? This is part of Illich's vision come to life, potentially. At the same time, all of the paradoxes and difficulties, like you're saying, the parasocial dimension, the kind of consumption things, and these all have good aspects too. But the censorship, the surveillance, the self-censoring, the definitive, projection, all of those things. But we do have these other possibilities, and they do exist, and they are happening. And I think, that's the dialogic, that's the kind of relational thing of curiosity, collective curiosity that opposes the kind of fear which can only individuate us. Like it's fear that makes us individuals. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, great. I mean, obviously, of course, Nina touches on so many brilliant and important insights about the status of education with a capital E. I mean, I guess one of the things that I find interesting at the moment is the huge contradiction that has occurred, and maybe, Theory Underground is a symptom of it, where we have the surplus genius, the millennial surplus genius. Everybody has gone to university, not everybody, 30 to 40% of people. And as somebody who takes things very literally, you study, you take it seriously. This allows you to have a capacity to think. And as the rate of profit has neared zero, we're in this absolute crunch time with capitalism. We have a sort of weird form of philanthropy capitalism, a disavowal of what is before our very eyes. And we have this huge population of thwarted semi-young people, I don't know how young millennials are anymore, but who have been trained to think to a certain degree. Obviously, the commoditization of education has impinged on the real sort of embrace of contradiction that comes with thinking, met with this very illogical system. One thing that Nina touched on is how an item of speech or a point is taken as an absolute and an absolute identifying sort of signifier of everything that you can contribute to the world. And I do think this is partly to do with, as the rate of profit has neared zero, and this is to do with the fact that value in capitalism is generated through sacrifice. As things have become automated and there's been no reinvestment in jobs, people don't have jobs. So where is the sacrifice coming from? Well, there's a desire or a need to generate surplus value somewhere. And I think this is coming through the commoditization of subjectivity, of interpersonal relationships, and of your own identity. In terms of sort of a Hegelian critique, Anna Kornblue has made this point in her most recent book, but this sort of identity signifier, this absolutism, is very much a sense certainty way of thinking, which for Hegel is like kind of the lowest form of thought. And it's a version of abstraction where everything represents, it's very literal. So as Hegel says, A doesn't equal A. A word is not its meaning in an apple never means apple. There's a whole universe that's generated with the signifier. There's no absolute one-to-one in any sense. No human is at one with themselves. There's no absolute other than lack itself. So when but commodity logic does try to quash lack and contradiction with an absolute in a sort of religious sense. You have a sort of ontological lack, a sense of lack that needs to be filled by a possible promise in oneness that the commodity offers. And so when logic itself or subjectivity itself is commoditized, the quality of what it actually represents is sort of undermined. But yeah, we have this contradiction between the fact that there's so many people who've been trained to think to a certain degree and the fact that we are at every turn banned from doing so, and often within the institution itself. So yeah, I guess it has to go somewhere, and maybe this is a symptom of it. Yeah.
I'm the symptom of it. Yeah, this is. I wrote a little note to Anne and Nancy. And I said, "Do you want to go before or after me?" And both of them wanted to go after me, and so I will go next. And this is more like the performance presentation, segment of the thing. And I kind of do actually have some thoughts prepared. I'm not going to read them to you, don't worry. But I'll going back to this class idea. I don't know anybody who went to college before the age of 22. I don't know anybody who went to college before the age of 22. Nothing. No one in my family, and I've got a big family. I'm one of 10 kids, right? And I've got a lot of aunts and uncles, like a lot. And we went to family reunions. Like no one went to college. Like how did all those people not go to college and still have seemingly meaningful lives, right? Like is it really necessary? Is like this big question. And I grew up in an environment that was very opposed to college and considered it a waste of time. I considered it a waste of money. And in my case, I kind of was a big waste of time and money because I went $60,000 into debt to get an interdisciplinary master's degree in critical theory, which is to say there wasn't a proper program for critical theory at my university, and I put this thing together. Okay, but I also studied philosophy for my bachelor's, and so the question is then like, well, what's the point of that, and why did I do it, and yeah, I think that the short version is Obama expanded the Affordable Care Act. And that actually made it so that I was able to get this Pell Grant thing, which paid for a significant portion of imagine that. They could have cost more than $60,000 if not for the Pell Grant. What the fuck? Right? And so that's crazy, first of all. But it was almost suicidal. Like where I was at and the decision that I made to go to the university, it was a way of of completely switching gears in my whole life. I was deciding this is going nowhere. The way that I've been living, it's going nowhere. And in a lot of ways, I'd reached all of my dreams from my later teens and my early 20s. I'd reached them all. I was popular, in the music scene. Hooray! And outside of that, I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is the point of all this? And I just felt like I was trapped in like a cycle of just partying and working. And the jobs, I've always had a problem with authority, I think. I'm not an anti-authoritarian kind of person, but I always had issues with my management. And I was just from one entry-level gig to another. And the whole time, everyone's like anti-university. Everyone that I worked with, all of my coworkers, all of my friends, everyone in the music scene, everyone in my family, everyone's anti-university. But at the point that I said I want to go, it was because a couple of my friends from the scene had actually started going themselves, and I was just like, why are you doing that? Like, isn't it just a big waste of money? Like, and my anarchist friend Alex, he's like, well, I get all of these student loans that I can spend on tattoos for my sleeves that I'll never pay back because I'm going to move to Costa Rica and be an expat. And I get to study political philosophy, and so I'm studying anarchism and Marxism. And yeah, I have to do some classes that I don't like, but it's cool because I'm hacking the system. And I was like, okay, no one told me about that. And so I was like, I'm going to do that. And it very much was like, I don't think I'll ever be able to do anything with this. I'm skipping a couple of steps. I was going for something practical right at the beginning, and I was going to just study electives on the side, but then I really quickly fell in love with philosophy and psychology. Anyway, I'm never going to be able to do anything with this, and then just pushing the fuck it button. And part of it was because life wasn't worth living. And Socrates says, and this really resonated with me, like the idea that the unexamined life's not worth living. And I was like, I relate. And I think that a lot of people I grew up around like actually would probably disagree. And I think that they have a perfectly fine life. And I would agree that their life is probably about as good as a human life can be under the conditions that we're living, which are shit. Going to university wouldn't fix that for them. Going into $60,000 of debt wouldn't fix that for them. The idea that would fix that for them is insane. And nobody should be like buying this lie. And I love how Catherine Liu in Virtue Hoarders talks about how, I think she talks about this, about how the plumber in the 70s was looked down on by the society, but he could support a wife and kids and have a house. How much has changed since then, right? And so of course Obama, who is, thanks Obama for, expanding the Affordable Care Act. In a sort of sense, it really did make things possible for me. But at the same time, it's coupled with all Democrats like telling everybody that the solution to poverty is more education, which is to say there are jobs that need to be done by people who will not have the educational pedigree that we do. Well, it's because they weren't very good at school, which means that they weren't very smart, which means that they weren't very gifted, which means that they weren't very disciplined, which means that they kind of deserve to be in this position, whatever that position is. And this is all part of my whole spiel here that I wrote up. It's just meritocracy, right? It's all about meritocracy. The education system, and this is a buzzword. I don't like this buzzword, and it's not the one that I want my whole talk to revolve around. But it's the way in. So if you're familiar with the term meritocracy and the problems that come with a society that is heavily meritocratic, then that might be a good way in. But what causes meritocracy, right? Now, I've always thought I kind of think that people who work really hard at things should maybe get something extra. I've always felt like, well, maybe that's just I've internalized the petty bourgeois, ideology, perhaps. But I actually think that, you know, a heart surgeon should probably do heart surgery, and I don't want to study philosophy from a random person who's got opinions about Hegel. I would rather study it from Cadell here, because he has read, you know, the phenomenology spirit in the and the science of logic and the philosophy of right, and now he's reread them and he's teaching them. Well, I think I'd rather take it from him than from a random person. That doesn't mean that random person doesn't deserve to have a dignified life, though. And it doesn't mean that person should have to pursue the higher arts or cultivate their human capacities to have a dignified life. And it seems like that's a distinction that gets lost, right? People think, oh no, the solution to poverty is education, versus like, well, who needs that? Abolish the liberal arts colleges, which is actually Catherine Liu's position. And I actually, I half agree with her. We can come back to that maybe later. It's more complicated than that. But discursive Taylorism is for me like the real issue here. And I'll come back to it when we get to the sort of causes of anti-intellectualism part of this. But for now, I just want to say that this term, discursive Taylorism, relates to the professional managerial class and the role that it took on in the 20th century, when self-aware class collaborationists who were freaked out by the working class movements and populism from just 20 years or 30 years prior, like Winslow Taylor. Frederick Winslow, I keep saying Charles. Altour, I keep saying Charles Winslow Taylor. Frederick Winslow Taylor writes The Principles of Scientific Management. Edward Bernays writes Propaganda. W.E.B. Du Bois writes The Talented Tenth. All of these guys are doing something. What are they doing? They're ultimately writing these sort of manifesto statements to capitalists and saying, look, our position in society as the talented tenth, our position as the enlightened vanguard of our race, our respective race, and this is W.E.B. Du Bois talking. Taylor didn't talk this way, but or with Bernays, you know, I come from public relations. I understand the public opinion machine. I understand how to reach the people who are influential in all of the societies that make up civic the fabric of civic life. And every one of them is selling themselves to capitalists, saying, I've got it, guys. Work with me. I'll make a whole discipline out of what I do. I'll teach other people how to do this. They can work for you, and then you don't have to send in the Pinkertons to break up the workers. We'll actually have preempted working class organizing by shaping public opinion, by developing the principles of scientific management in Taylorism, by setting up these universities where the talented tenth of every race will segregate themselves away from the lower 90% so that they can so we can all get together with one another and be smart, and then go back to our people and tell them what's right. And when W.E.B. Du Bois was writing this, he was like a younger, more conservative kind of guy, and he got more radical as time passed on. I have to say that piece because some people get really annoyed that I'm like throwing him in here with like being one of the fathers of what was just this like 3% fraction of the jobs that one could have in society to becoming like 30%, which is what happens with the university changing its intent and its entire approach to everything, and then the public schooling system itself changing everything to accommodate itself towards this track. And so the professionals and managers of capital originally sold themselves over the course of 30 years in a very self-conscious way as the solution to get out ahead of working class organizing. I talk about this all in my piece in Underground Theory called Lefter Than Thou. I use a lot of quotes and I show you some of my sources and stuff, and so right now I'm skipping over all of that. Get the book, come on. I can't take this on the airplane back, just buy it, please. But with that aside, when I think of meritocracy, what I'm thinking about is that a person's entire schooling experience, whether it was privileged or not, is part of a system of you being told implicitly that you either deserve a six-figure income or you don't. And if you don't deserve to have opinions on things. If you don't, then you shouldn't be reasoning with anybody. If you don't, you should be taking your marching orders. If you don't, deserve a six-figure income, then you should just put a lot of thought into who you subscribe to. Because if you subscribe to the wrong influencer, or the wrong professional, or the wrong manager, or the wrong ideology, well, then you actually triply earn your poverty. And if you're not poor yet, we'll make you. That's what I mean by discursive Taylorism, because I believe in Taylorism. I think it's great. I think that we absolutely need to have professions, and that civil engineers are important people, but there's a big difference between a civil engineer and a journalist or a social scientist who thinks, well, actually, racism's a settled matter. We have the definition right here. It's our sociological definition. You either agree with it or you're racist, right? Like, end of conversation. This skill hoarding and, oh, I get to speak on this and you don't, is either on the basis of the credentials from the merit that you've put into the education system and its recognition bestowed upon you, or your identity itself. And it's usually some combination of the two. And so I think that creates reaction, and it's legitimate reaction, and it creates populist legitimate reaction. But that populist legitimate reaction is fucking stupid almost all the time. It's idiotic, but it's legitimate because it's coming from a real place. And I'm more sympathetic to that than I am to the other thing that it eggs on, which is a sort of technocratic neoliberal elitism, right? And so I think the two drive each other.
I was going to say, just to add to what you were saying, because I think one of the things that's quite interesting now is, in terms of, as you say, the question of meritocracy being used as an ideological weapon to blame the victim. But also you have an interesting kind of phenomenon of the people who were promised the six-figure salaries, who now, as things have got so bleak, the real, as psychoanalysis kind of tells us, that humans would rather die than give up a fantasy image of themselves. So if your whole recognition that you've come towards in terms of your identity, how you relate to others, is at the top of this meritocratic pile, and nothing has become of this, and in fact, you have been proletarianized, the extreme trauma, precisely because of this meritocratic snobbery of identifying with those with whom you now share a class interest, is people would rather die than accept this.
100%.
So, you see this, Britain, it was a big case, you see this in the 2019 general election, that a lot of things, and the aesthetics kind of signifiers that have been educated, bestowed upon those who went to university, the sort of confidence of critique, which can actually become the very dream of capitalism itself and the very mechanism by which it's sort of legitimated, would rather anything than side with the populace. And if there is any kind of change, you need something sort of universal and engaged on a large scale. So it's often this university, and as you say, it was not by design potentially, but as a symptom of the declining rate of profit. How do we get more money from people, put them in debt, take them out of the job market for a bunch of years because there's not enough jobs? It becomes the defining feature by which people separate, and refuse to align with those with whom they share class interest, because it's so traumatic and embarrassing. And I wonder if, what we saw, the tragedy of sort of Corbyn and Bernie and stuff like that, when you had sort of media movements that represented these thwarted geniuses, that actually were just about trying to retain a class interest, as in, I have the right kinds of views, I'm, not proletarian because I learned this at university, and the trauma of kind of giving that up and identifying that just because somebody doesn't think the same way as you doesn't mean that they're a bad person, and in fact that those judgments that are cast as ethical questions of having the right views are actually class questions.
Yeah, and it ties directly into what Walter Ben Michaels talks about in the problem with diversity, right? Which is that if you're focusing on, the subtext of almost all of this sort of identitarian PMC, social justice discourses, actually capitalism and its meritocracy is fair. The only issue was that X, Y, or Z group was historically disadvantaged because something else was unfair, usually bigotry. And so that becomes like this huge factor. And then, of course, if somebody doesn't fit into one of those categories and they're poor, well, then they must just deserve it because they're ignorant. And in fact, they're probably the ones who are still the maintainers and carriers of that phobia, right? And therefore a legitimate target of our vitriol or repressed inability to express. Well, let Nina talk about this. Really, I feel like this is something that you've been working on. But I will close out my little piece here by just saying that Benjamin Studebaker, in his book, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way is Shut, is that what it's called? Yeah. Okay, I did it. He talks about the rump professionals versus the fallen professionals. I don't know where the word rump comes from. It just makes me think of butts. I don't know, but the rump professional is the professional who has succeeded. Maybe that's why they sit around on their butts, because they succeeded and they can hold down this chair. I don't know, but anyway, the rump professionals are the ones who have succeeded through the system, and then the fallen professionals are the ones who went through the education system and for whatever reason, they do not have that class ascendancy that was promised them. And the interesting thing that he talks about is like how most books that are written now are written by rump professionals to fallen professionals. And it's a way of keeping the literariat, those of us who are like, well, I don't spend my time listening to music. I'm at Amazon listening to books, keeping ourselves separate from everyone else by being like, yeah, I'm woke because I subscribe to X, Y, or Z things, right? And so, 2020, Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility, everybody who's actually like doing the work during that period of time, like they see themselves as deserving because they're doing the work, right? And so this is where you have the difference between the rump professional like Robin DiAngelo and the worker with earbuds who's the fallen professional who's doing the work. The part that's missing there though is the right wing of the PMC. It tends to write to a different audience, I think. And I think the issue here is like most of the time people conflate the petty bourgeoisie and the PMC. They're both part of the middle class, but they have unique historical placement and functions in the reproduction of capitalism. And the petty bourgeois is like the small business owner. We're petty bourgeois in that sense. Whereas the PMC is like, it's not about capital and the profit motive so much as prestige, recognition, your academic pedigree, etc. And so it's more related to titles, right? And the sort of privileges afforded by the effort you put into the education system. But I think the right wing in the United States especially, its rump professionals, its rump PMC, tends to write to the petty bourgeoisie. And that's where the self-help and business success ideology and literature comes in. Whereas on the left side, it's a lot more this like White Fragility, how to be anti-racist, memoirs, et cetera. And so that's the way I've kind of, that I'm thinking about it. Now, I'll bring it all back to all of this later and talk more about all of these things. But for now, it is time to turn it over to Anne and then Nance. And the question that we're all responding to here still is, what is anti-intellectualism and how's it impacted you and your work? I feel like I went way off course, but I can always come back to any of that later, but here we go.
Awesome, yeah. I want to actually start my turn here with I was curious what the Google definition of anti-intellectualism is, and so this is just the first sentence on Wikipedia. It's hostility to and mistrust of intellect, intellectuals, and intellectualism, commonly expressed as depreciation of education and philosophy, and the dismissal of art, literature, and science as impractical, politically motivated, and even contemptible human pursuits. And so I think kind of Dave's introduction there framed this idea that, this anti-intellectualism often comes from more kind of working class backgrounds, or in your case, in your family, a little more non-political, apolitical, or conservative type people who go, that's a waste of your money, you don't need that, it's just left-wing indoctrination, don't go to the university. I know that was kind of your parents' sentiment, who we love and have supported you, but that was kind of the sentiment. On the other hand, though, I think it, at this point, is built into the structure of the university, kind of based on, you know, what Helen and Nina both talked about a little bit. And I'm sure we'll get into like this idea of the neoliberal university and what that means. You both started on that. But this idea that you go to the university to get your degree, to get your job, everything has to be so practical. Part of it, yeah, is that fear of the debt that you're accumulating, that fear of like the economic precarity of our current situation, especially. And so everything has to be just practical. We got to get our job, and what that I think looks like concretely, and in my own experience, I'm the youngest person on this panel. I graduated from college within the last 5 years, and so I kind of got to see firsthand like exactly what's going on right now. We're also involved in the university and in trying to build classes. It's such a struggle because we are so excited, like we just want to share our own enthusiasm. But man, the audience is not there. They don't give two shits about like university foundation level classes, these introductory classes, which I always remember my teachers and parents, you know, talking about, oh, when I was in college, I took this, you know, history of Broadway musicals or introduction to horror movies as kind of these artistic classes that always stuck with them, even if it wasn't directly related to their major or the field they were going to pursue. And just in my own experience, students like are way removed from that. They just want to do what is directly related to their majors. And I think, you know, for all these structural reasons, economic reasons, but then also just this kind of customer relationship that the university now has with students, that's how the university functions now. And so kind of we see this like unwillingness to give students a full book. Like in my whole time in the university, I was studying social science. I did not have to read a single like full primary text of sociology in any of my sociology classes. Maybe the most was like an excerpt here or there in a textbook on Marx, Weber, or Durkheim. But like I feel like my college degree means nothing because I didn't actually get that rigor. My most rigorous classes were from this, you know, controversial conservative professor who everyone ended up getting kicked off of campus just because he assigned us like real books, and I didn't see that a lot in the university. So very much of a hesitation to make writing assignments like meaningful and challenging. Everything's just all, oh, share your opinion. Oh, respond in 200 words to your peers on this online forum. A big devaluing of the arts and humanities, even just in like talking to students or in some of the research I've done over the last few years with the sociology department, interviewing both students and residents in the Treasure Valley area in Idaho. People just have this conception that, oh, the arts and humanities, sure, they're great, whatever, but they're not practical. They don't matter. They're not going to get you that job. And, you know, in that, going back to that definition from Wikipedia, thinking about like the art, literature, science, philosophy, those fields that we kind of think of as creating and building this like deep history of intellectualism, it's just not seen as important right now. There's really a lack of just rigor in general, especially in like American universities. And just in thinking about the ways that it impacted me, like I previously mentioned, I just really feel like my college degree, like, yeah, I feel very lucky to have gotten it. I feel very privileged to have graduated debt-free, but I just kind of feel like, whatever. Like, I would have rather have gone to some small private liberal arts college and gotten that rigorous education. I met Dave. That was the best part of my college degree. And I got to do, you know, some research, but for the most part, as a whole, I'm like, I don't really feel like I'm that much smarter. Like, my high school classes were a little bit harder than 99% of my courses at college. And I also and I'm sure, again, we'll get into this as well throughout the evening, because of this fear, I think because of this kind of inability to have this dialogue and these conversations for cultural reasons, for economic reasons, like economic necessity, towards the end of my time, I really just didn't feel like I had the space to like say what I actually thought about some of these topics that are especially, tackled head on in the field of sociology. And I also feel like just the way that this anti-intellectualism has impacted me personally is like I feel misunderstood by maybe society or maybe even like my parents. I feel weird saying this, my brother's right there. But kind of this like not fully understanding why doing what we do, doing what Dave does, doing what all of us are doing here, writing books and not having like a 9-to-5 office job with benefits, like why it matters. Almost every time I talk to my parents on the phone, I love them, like bless their hearts. But they're like, so, what career are you going to get? Don't forget, you got to have health insurance soon. Like, it's like, I understand where you're coming from and I so appreciate it, but that's not what life is all about. It's like just, I got to get my health insurance and my benefits. And so it's just like a constant personal struggle of, trying to find our own spot in the world and like actually survive and make a living. But doing Theory Underground and reading and writing and kind of doing all this, we have to do our little gigs on the side. Like I'm, currently employed at an Amazon warehouse in the United States while doing Theory Underground courses and teaching as an adjunct at the university. It's not what my parents had envisioned for me, but I feel like it's meaningful. And so that just feeling of being like misunderstood and, well, why does this even matter is not a fun feeling to sit with. So I'm sure Nance will have more to say and then we can open it up. But thank you.
I think anti-intellectualism is largely protective. People are told you're a dumbass, go to work. And instead of like being able to do anything about that, they're like, okay, I'm a dumbass then. So everything you stand for, everything you apparently represent is not for me. So I'm going to be the worker and I'm going to be reactionary a lot of the time because workers get categorized as reactionary by people who have had the time and privilege to go to university and raise themselves up above that and they have the right stuff. And so I have a lot of empathy for, like people that are categorized as reactionaries. My family, most of my family is very, very brash, very crass, very offensive, and they're wonderful people. But then there is also like this kind of instrumentalized education that also serves as a form of anti-intellectualism. If you are in the university and you're trying to do something that doesn't follow the script, you'll be canceled. You'll have hot coffee thrown on you. You'll be called a horrible, horrible person. And it's, I don't know. I think we need to lead with empathy. I don't think we should like reify this meritocracy, this right stuff narrative. One interesting thing that happened at Theory Underground, not only is it courses and seminars and lectures, but we also produce a lot of content for YouTube and for podcasts. And Anne brought up critical media theory. One of the other ongoing Snellgrove McKerracher seminars is critical doxology and Timenergy. And that's where we interact with the self-help and the business success books and magical thinking and The Secret and all these other doxological artifacts or cultural objects that represent the doxa of today. We try to engage with them empathetically and rigorously. And it was funny, right before we left on tour, we spent 12 hours reading Martin Hagelin's This Life. And I think it was utterly fantastic. That book, I think it's a great book. And it's, I don't know, seen as self-help maybe. But we got a lot of pushback from certain people who just said, that book's trash. You guys don't waste your time. And that was kind of shocking. Like I think that is another form of, or
It's like, do you know nothing of our work? We're those people who would read that, yes.
yeah. But yeah, I don't know, it's weird. If you buy Underground Theory and you read the piece I wrote, you'll see that I opened up by saying the only thing I ever wanted as a kid was to become Dr. Nance. Because that wasn't in the cards for me. That was the one thing I couldn't have, and so for whatever reason I kind of latched onto it and never got the chance to do that. I dropped out of college 3 times because it's hard to be a parent, and it's hard to work, and it's hard to do life and also go through the university. And it's funny now that I'm on kind of the back end of a lot of self-hate and questioning to kind of see, like, well, they weren't doing the thing I thought they were doing in the university all along anyway. Like, I want to understand. I want to seek. I want to know things. I want to truly research and study. I don't want to just got a job, go get a job. I can get a job. Like, I can drive a truck. I can clean a toilet. I can deliver bits and baubles on a gig platform. And I do and have done all those things. But there is something more, maybe not. Maybe I'm huffing my own farts. Maybe I'm deluding myself to kind of cope with some void inside. But I do think there is something that we can achieve. And you got to go about it the hard way. And that's not just like, let me half-ass read the book, let me write the 5-paragraph essay, and then give me the piece of paper, and then I have the right stuff. Yay, congratulations. I'm better than the guy cleaning toilets.
So the main questions for this event were, what is anti-intellectualism? How has it impacted you in your work? How has it changed how you approach the projects you are involved in? And in some way or another, I think we've all more or less, actually addressed those. And the other 2 questions are, what do you take to be the major causes of anti-intellectualism, and are these symptomatic of something else? And so I don't think we need to have a particular order here. This isn't presentation time anymore. I'm genuinely curious from all 4 of you. I can't count. All 5 of us. Yeah. What are the main causes then? I'm hearing a lot of different things, and maybe we can come back to some of the things that people have brought up. But yeah, fear is definitely one of them. But is that symptomatic of something else, Nina?
Yeah, well, I think all of these economic questions are, inextricably intertwined. I mean, just to go back to Anne's point, I mean, when I was studying at Warwick in 97, on one module on the European novel, we had to read 13 European novels, many of which are massive from start to finish, right? Like that was the expectation, right, for a degree. I did philosophy and literature my first degree, and then I switched to philosophy. And that was totally not normal, right? It was understood to be a kind of a seriously intellectual exercise that would take a lot of work and study. At that point, fewer people went to university, and it was free, and the local authority paid. And this is how to put it. I mean, as I said, there has always been this desire to learn and to read, and I think crushing the fantasy of what the university became is absolutely crucial. Like you said, it isn't what you thought it was. It isn't. It's simply not that. Somebody sitting at home reading a novel or reading a Plato dialogue is infinitely more worthy. And the fact that you can find other people online who want to discuss it with you, or you marry somebody or have a partner who is intellectually curious, this is it. That's what it is, actually. And I think what we're seeing with the kind of PMC and what's being produced by the universities is actually a kind of intellectualized anti-intellectualism. This is the reality. It is, I always love that my favorite meme form is the one of the bell curve where you have the sort of caveman, I think he's called Grog or something, at one end, and then you have like an esoteric monk at the other, and it's sort of mapped onto IQ. You know, we don't have to get into a discussion about IQ, but let's say, you know, somebody at one end stating a simple truth, right, and somebody at the other end stating the same simple truth, and in the middle you've got this kind of Reddit midwit sort of, you know, coming up with like millions of sort of reasons and formula and so on. You know, you've probably all seen this meme, and you know, the point is in a way that like, well, what is the point? I suppose that there are simple truths, right? There are things that can be stated in a very obvious way, and you don't need to go through this kind of intellectualized anti-intellectualism, the kind of all it does is confer status and debt, and you know, the disappointment, which then creates resentment, which then is taken out and used to divide people precisely. Think of Hillary Clinton's line about the deplorables. Think of the, as you say, the absolute hatred for reactionaries, you know, views that were very simple, very straightforward, and that everybody agreed upon have now become toxic and punishable. You know, Christopher Lash's book on progress, The True and Only Heaven, is very, very interesting in this regard. It's a very big book, takes a long time to read. But what he's trying to talk about there, we're reading it with Pierre and others, is this kind of lower class, lower middle class, artisanal view of the world in which there are limits, everything has its price, you know, and that there are kind of simple truths, and this is a kind of reality. And this is the kind of thing that's crushed by a sort of theoretical intellectualism, which doesn't have anything to do with a kind of real speculative thought, right? Like the dialogic conversation, but rather is just a kind of symptom or a sign of a belonging to a particular class. And it is just, you know, as we see with the bureaucracies, and Britain still has public institutions, right? Like we have huge things like the NHS and the BBC and the civil service. And it is a huge problem. Like institutions are a massive problem. This again, Illich is really spot on about this, Agamben as well. You know, what institutions have a tendency to become their opposite and to become absolutely dangerous and toxic. So let's say the health system starts off about healing people and ends up creating sick patients, right? Ends up creating sick people that it needs to treat, right? Like there's something kind of machinic about the institution, and we still have a sort of shift from the PMC or the educated middle class into these institutions like the civil, and they do dictate the tone, right? And I think it's very, very interesting when people stop, for example, watching the BBC, right? When they stop listening to politicians, when they stop listening to people in those classes, because everything they're saying is just completely disconnected from the concerns of normal people, right? And I mean that in the most robust sense. And I think we are going to see the collapse of these institutions, right? Like everyone is thinking, what comes next? What comes after this? Whether in the UK or other liberal democracies, so-called, you know, what comes after this? And how are we going to be sort of organising ourselves, and how are we going to be prepared to sort of think and live in perhaps different ways, perhaps in ways that are no longer based around a kind of consumerist individualism that's sort of predicated on a image of desire, and coupled with these kind of big institutions that have provided this kind of platform for, you know, the middle class.
Yeah, I guess two causal factors that I think are quite interesting, and I guess they relate to the same thing, which is the inequality of our age. So the immense hoarding of wealth by a tiny group of people, monopoly capitalism, consequential philanthropy capitalism, how capital mobility has meant that wealth can't be taxed, how inequality, Gary Stevenson, brilliant pop economist, has written a lot about this and talked a lot about this, how inequality itself generates more inequality and increases the value of assets, and people have to sell off their assets to keep up, and you know, we're just having an immense sort of Victorianization of most people's sort of lives, how do governments redistribute when they can't even tax wealth? So, and then again, this relates to sort of falling rate of profit and how to get more money from people and tends to be poor people or normal people, whatever. Anyway, so philanthropy capitalism, there's a meme that I keep seeing, or I saw for a while, and Alfie and I had a real incident recently with philanthropy capitalism, how you have to, this is a result of monopolies, how you have to sort of, monopolies, as Nina pointed out, and institutions in capitalism itself. You have a brilliant example of your dad's dental practice, can I say, where basically Nina's dad's dental practice was sold for £2,000.
My dad was an NHS dentist. Right, no, sorry, yeah.
Use your example like probably more times than you.
No, that's fine. It's a really good example. So my father trained as an NHS dentist after the war. When men were still dentists, he failed all his A-levels, but they needed to train dentists because there weren't enough of them. So he trained and he worked for 40 years as an NHS dentist. This was in an era when dentistry became private. You'll remember under Thatcher, there were very few NHS dentists left. My father, at various points, had 4-year waiting lists. He managed to treat everybody in the area's teeth really well. He was very loved. My father is a wonderful, very civic-minded, very friendly, very good guy. I mean, he was actually more of an engineer than a professional, and you know, consequently, he was very good at his job. And so when the time came for him to retire and sell his practice, precisely because he had looked after people's teeth so well, his practice was valued at £2,000 because private firms looking at it said, there's nothing for us to do here. We can't make money on very expensive bridges, or, you know, we can't flog kind of, you know, expensive services. So for doing his job properly for 40 years, my father was absolutely punished. He also gave away loads of free treatment, which, you know, didn't help.
But yeah, that's one of the principal like contradictions of capitalism, profoundly unutilitarian, actually. It's like the Hinge slogan, designed to be deleted. Well, if that was the case, you wouldn't be making any money. So obviously you have to fail to succeed. You keep people temporarily frustrated daters so that they keep dating. But, you know, and eventually sort of this monopoly capitalism that we kind of exist in, I'm a filmmaker. The way in which, I mean, it's sort of a complex thing because the government quangos that were sort of set up in the 70s, which were normally like, the idea was to protect sort of homegrown film. And in fact, what kind of happened over the years was a turn towards turning Europe, Britain, where I'm from in Northern Ireland, into sort of a corporate colony for American media corporations. And basically, people will be really horrified to know that it's tax money goes to corporations. They get given free workers, grants, huge tax breaks. There's no other capacity for anybody else to keep up. There's no roles for people apart from the sort of 14 weeks a year when whoever the hell comes and gets their millions of quid. And then when there was actually an edict sent round to all the workers in my region that they had to lower their rates to below union levels because they were causing a bubble by being greedy, and these American media corporations were threatening to go elsewhere. And there was no sort of consideration of the fact that this is actually a sort of socialism, redistribution of wealth upwards to media organizations that are struggling with their falling rate of profit. Anyway, so basically there's no alternative except for these quangos. I have been helping a filmmaker to produce a short film. One of the only places to apply for short film funding in the UK is the BFI, and the latest statistic was like 1,000 short films applications, 1,500 for 30 annual grants. So how do you pick? But this is where you kind of, in these monopoly situations, you kind of have to go cap in hand. And so on the one hand, you have to show that you're meritorious, but also everything that's stacked against you. So you have to be good, but not that good, you know. I saw this meme that I kept popping up on Instagram a while back was, you know, I guess designed for young, maybe first-generation immigrants, second-generation immigrants in the US from south of the border. And it was a meme that was sort of poking fun at the fact, you know, when you come and you're trying to get your visa, you're there in your sort of Monopoly man suit, and then when you're applying for scholarship, you're there in your sort of, you know, whatever. So this is the contradiction that you sort of have to play against, and it sort of undermines itself. So we have a meritocracy, but not up to a certain point, because we have to have the ideological foil of the goodliness, and we're all so needy, and we all have to go cap in hand to the few people who sort of dole out the tiny crumb that is redistributed when our actual tax money is being redistributed upwards, and there's not enough. I mean, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse because there's no government money to actually fund the services that were just taken for granted, and we're all going to have to sell off our assets to have healthcare, etc. But just within this sort of realm of extreme wealth, I kind of left academia. It's a long story. I don't want to get too personal narrative. But anyway, I was a high school teacher, and then when I went and became an artist, I sort of did private tutoring for a long time. Quite a depressing thing, but a sort of a thing that people have had to do since whatever period of time to be able to try to support their art. And I privately tutored some not quite extremely wealthy people. And over the years that I worked in that sphere, sort of, I guess I started when I was in high school, so it's a sort of a long period of time, and seeing the sort of changing nature of the wider economy, because education really is a symbol, and it really is a factor in the changing scope and scale of the economy, and the way people have been brought into a failing system and things like that. But those at the very, very top now are so rich. Wealth used to be justified by various mechanisms, noblesse oblige. You know, if there's some sense of noblesse oblige, you have to have education to a certain extent to sort of be able to kind of act for the quote-unquote good of the people you are tending, you know, your flock or whatever bollocks. There was a feudal justification, but we also have something, you know, equally or more sinister now. But you know, and there was also the sense of, you know, I've earned it, or I have the time to not labour and to think, or what have you. And I'm, you know, a patron of the great artists of the day or whatever. Now we have wealth that is so extreme. I mean, the levels are never before seen in the history of the world, that there is no longer the need to justify it, because the level is so extreme. There's sort of dialectical kind of subjectivity of the masses. Who gives a fuck, you know? Who gives a fuck what they think, you know? And this is also seen in the desire to go to Mars instead of just live amongst the rest of the people and create a world which actually can sustain life, or go into your nuclear bunker. But so I guess there's some things I can say or not say, because you have to sign an NDA in some crazy situations. But these families now, and often those wealth has been accrued in the last sort of 10 years, are so rich that no one will ever have to work again. So education is just, you have to sort of nominally have somebody there to execute a role that is still legally necessary for children under 16. But it's sort of not cool, and it's not needed. I think the wealth of people like you know, the Gates, I'm sure their kids went to like the Obamas, Harvard or whatever. But now we're talking about orders of magnitude where it just is so abstracted from everyday life, from the need to even legitimize it, that they don't value education at all.
I just go like, wow, because yeah, I feel like you would think that if you didn't have to work, I mean, like Timenergy theory, Dave's Timenergy theory, which we'll get into, is just this idea that if we had, structures that supported us having time with energy in any given week to pursue, you know, these higher arts, like that's what we as humans would be inclined to do. And so it's just fascinating to hear like a firsthand experience when, because on the one hand, you know, you can't have this time energy if the whole society doesn't have it. It has to exist between us. But having a certain amount of wealth where you don't have to work gives you or your family some sense of this like relative time and energy to make great art, etc., etc. And the fact that it's actually not valued is really fascinating. And I guess I wonder, from your perspective or anyone's perspective, like, why do you think that was the culture of these households?
It's a very good question. I mean, there's a certain, you know, we were talking about dialogue and being able to exist beyond solipsism. A certain level of wealth just abstracts you so much from reality that some of these, I've always wanted to sort of turn some of these experiences into like some kind of narrative film, but it's impossible to do because it's too surreal. Like if I sort of explain some of the things that I've seen, you'd be like, no, that's not real. So I don't know. I don't know whether, obviously, lack and this idea of jouir sans entrave, 1968 stuff. You can't enjoy things without a limit, with sense that, some kind of restraint. I would say that these environments are like very psychotic, very illogical. Capitalism has got to a point. It's not utilitarian anymore. There's no kind of like social good in this level of wealth. I mean, I don't know where we go from here, and I don't know how. Basically, there needs to be some kind of massive redistributionary effort with capital mobility. How the fuck do you do that? How do governments enforce it?
Let's start with making it so that these kids that they have can't take private jets and have to take public transportation with everyone else. You want to see public transportation get like updated for the new century? Make them have to take it, I'm not saying like they have to go out in the fields and get their hands dirty like Maoism or some shit. That is our favorite part of Maoism, but no, yeah, like but no, I think, so I wanted to bring it back really quick to the PMC and instrumentalization towards specialization and the way that plays into discursive Taylorism and how I see that as like a major cause of anti-intellectualism. But I don't think that people who are specialized, who let's just say that they've studied, I don't know, like Renaissance, like literature or some shit, like their whole life, are whole human beings. I'm not saying that they're it, right? Like if all you do is one thing, then you're not really tapping your humanness, which is not just to be a tool, right? Like the human is the more than just a tool, right? And capital wants, and also the state wants to reduce us to mere instruments, right? Appendages of some machine thing. And so this specialization, on the other side of it, you have people who, well, they're just called low skill wage workers. Or they're considered human surplus, right? Like they're extra mouths to feed. They're the dregs of society. It's the underclass, whatever, right? When obviously like that's necessary to scare the working class, and the working class is necessary to scare the professionals into what Aaron Wright called like the fear of falling, right? Which is so important and actually has so much to do with why our parents who love us don't want us to do economic suicide by pursuing philosophy and art, right? But I wanted to say that there's a couple of factors here. These are more like superficial almost in a sense, but we can't pass over them. And that is that on the one side, people are going off of what actually exists and what they actually experience and what they actually see. And that is, if you don't have work, and if you don't have prohibition, which would, you said it makes them psychotic, but it's like in the strictly Lacanian sense, like if there's no prohibition, they're going to be somewhat psychotic, right? And this everything being permitted for some without any kind of restriction is coupled with what? Like living in this world. They still live in this world in a sort of sense. Like they still have. I'm assuming they still have smartphones, right? Like they can still scroll. Well, most people who have to scroll at some point have to put that away because there is something about their job that makes them sometimes have to put it away. Or there's something about their like the schooling system that they're in that makes it so they actually have to switch gears from time to time. And if there's no pressures and no limits, then it would make sense. But it would make sense that people wouldn't do anything, right? But when it comes to time energy theory, and I have to say a couple of things about it. I don't think this disproves it. It's okay, don't worry. So, because the question, it's always like this thing that people do is like, well, if I had more time energy, here's what I would do. I would just jack off and eat ice cream and play video games. Yeah, and I have people say that, or I have people say other people that they know would do that, and it's like, sure, fair enough. You're going off of your experience or what you empirically observe in the behavior of other people. What happens when they have more time? Well, let's just think back to COVID. What happened? What did people do? Well, weren't they just super depressed? And I think we have to take that really seriously, and I do take it seriously in the Time Energy book. That's a very important insight. But that's because time energy is not the sufficient condition for the good life. It's just a necessary condition that none of the ideological discourses of today are able to actually tarry with or integrate. And I don't think it can be so easily co-opted into capitalism, is the point, because it needs us to be constantly self-valorizing ourselves for capital, which means reducing ourselves into a standing reserve of labor power, always on call for the market, right? And so constantly competing with one another towards those ends. And so time energy, just in case anyone didn't get the memo on this one, and several of you probably haven't, though once again, it does feel like this horse is getting beaten because we've been on tour. You know, how many stops on tour so far? You know, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Krakow,
Vienna, Krakow, yeah.
Glasgow. Yeah, we've been all over the place. And so like the time energy bit, we end up saying it a lot. You can listen to the talks we give on it. But the short version is that it is not just time and energy mashed together, which is partially meant to be intuitive and to relate to a person and their experience of never having time or energy, right? But as a technical concept, it means large energy infused repeatable blocks of reliable time between us. And those children of these billionaires do not have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time reliably between us, because there's no us there. The virtuous circle between genuine being with oneself and genuine being with others through solitude and solicitude, like Anne opened with, the conditions of possibility for that virtuous circle have been decimated. And it's not just decimated for working class people, it's decimated for everybody because we lack the institutions to build a commons around not just the redistribution of necessary labor itself, but also the cultivation of our higher human capacities. And so in that sense, you know, some people will say that we're humanists, and it's like guilty as fucking charged, I guess. But like, yeah, I didn't read books. I couldn't read before the age of 12. And I didn't read serious nonfiction until 23 when I decided to go to college. And of course, I'd been listening to some, I don't know if we'll call it serious nonfiction or not, but I'd been listening to some for a couple of years through audiobooks. But the reason I bring time energy back into this, and I want to relate it to the PMC, instrumentalization, specialization, discursive Taylorism, etc., is to say that time energy doesn't mean anything to us. Large energy infused repeatable blocks of time reliably between us throughout the week doesn't mean anything when everyone else is super busy and instrumentalized and specializing on something that is serving capital. When we don't have institutions that would prioritize the discovery of our talents and the cultivation of our higher human capacities. We don't have that. If you've experienced it, then let me know. I'm very curious to know what that was like, but I don't think any of us really have that. And some people went to less authoritarian schools where everybody got to sit around and talk about their emotions, and the banking model was pretty much bracketed out of the equation, and everything was very like, oh, what are you interested in? And that's progressive education as opposed to this more disciplinary approach that the working class is usually forced through. Literally coerced through. Like it is forced, right? The prime of your most formative years, as well as your 20s, is all about turning you into a standing reserve of labor power, which means that you are instrumentalized and specialized, and you're either the person who thinks they deserve the six-figure income or salary, or you're the undeserving, knucklehead who wasn't good at math, who deserves to just take orders at the gas station for the rest of their life. And I'm sorry apartments are so expensive. Maybe you should have tried to do better in school. And the point is like, yeah, of course, when people are broken because they don't have communities and they don't have families and everything is dysfunctional, of course people are like, well, yeah, I just play video games and jack off. Of course. Well, duh. Well, what else do you expect? You expect people just to get excited about things on their own? Hasn't everything in psychoanalysis already shown us that desire is desire of the other? And this is why educators, being sort of transmuters, transmitters of enthusiasm, why that matters. You don't get excited about these things without coming around other people who are passionate about these things. It doesn't work. You actually have to get out and be around other people. And the thing is for that to not just be a one-off, like, oh, you're so lucky that happened to you, for that to actually be something that people have access to, it just has to be built into the infrastructure, the civic infrastructure. It is an actual institutional problem. And we do not have institutions that are built for the 21st century. We do not have institutions that are built after the internet, right? Everything else is just putting Band-Aids and duct tape on the gears and trying to keep things going. Oh, shit. And so, like, the education system is just like the debt glut is growing. And in the meantime, everyone's like, well, I can learn that on YouTube. Why do I need to go there? And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. Why would you need to go there? Oh, wait. It's because we have a crisis on our hands. We've got a lot of crises that we've already touched on, and there's a lot that we haven't. But one of the biggest crises is a hostage crisis. The best and brightest and the people who are most passionate about the life of the mind and the various fields opened up by the liberating arts are hostage to this system called academia. They are reliant on it. And the only way to get access to them is to go there. And the thing is it is a tremendous privilege, and I wish it was actually considered a right, to be able to have access to them when you want to be able to study something. If you fall in love with philosophy, well, you should be able to go study under people who are teaching it and are passionate about it. But that's just not currently on offer. And I guess I'll wrap this up by just saying that the thing I'd said about Catherine Liu, saying that she calls for the abolition of the liberal arts colleges, and how I think she's only half right. It's look, I'm interested in everybody's opinions and what everybody might offer as far as solutions, whether they're reformist or revolutionary. I think that this idea of abolishing the liberal arts colleges is actually really interesting. She is correct in her diagnosis of what they have become in terms of the reproduction of class divisions and certain people thinking that they're just made of a very special stuff because they never worked a real fucking job in their lives and now they have opinions about art. Yeah, for sure. But also, we, and probably you all, still want to be able to go places where you can have that transmission of enthusiasm by people who are passionate about things. And I like the idea of learning webs in deschooling society. I like it a lot. But in order for it to be reliable and useful, it has to be institutionalized somewhat. And so how to do that is the big question. And I say, let the humanities and social sciences go to the library. Just let the professors who teach these things have salaries and teach at libraries and do public lectures and closed seminars and show people where the cool books are. I don't think that they belong in the neoliberal university, which is just a diploma mill it's like a really expensive trade school. And if anybody thinks they can turn back time or rewind where the neoliberal university is going, then, cool, go for it. But I don't think there's any rewinding it, and the humanities and social sciences will only continue to perish in the neoliberal university. So let it be STEM. They're trying to add it, they're trying to call it STEAM now. So anyone who doesn't know, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And they try to add the arts back into it by adding an A. In fact, your mom teaches at a school that has added the A back into it, but it's too little, too late, guys. It's not going to work. You're not going to be able to do that. You can teach people some graphic design, but it's not going to do the trick. The point is that people need to be able to do these things because they're goods in themselves. And everybody who ever had real-time energy, tutelage, which is the other, it's time energy, tutelage, what's the other T here?
Talent.
Yeah, everybody who's ever discovered talent and then has tutelage to develop that talent under a mentor, knows exactly what they would do with time energy. But if you haven't had the privilege of those other two T's, you're fucked. And so Benjamin Studebaker did this lecture for Theory Underground called Time Energy Before Descartes, which was the follow-up to my introductory lecture to Being in Time. And he talks about Confucius and Aristotle and Plato. And this is where he rolls out the three T's. It's tutelage, talent, and time energy. These are each one is a necessary condition, but it's lacking without the others. And so, yeah, you have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time reliably between us. even if you did, which no one does, but even if you did, without mentorship and the ability to discover your talents and then hone those for their own sake, you're not yet human. You're still just an instrument of capital. Yeah, we're going to open it up in a second, actually. And Pierre, what's the time expectation? I think. Okay, cool.
I guess there's one more thing in thinking about kind of the roots of anti-intellectualism that particularly have been influencing kind of my own thought and way of thinking about it. And it stemmed from one kind of my own experience in the university, just seeing things going on in the media, but particularly it was Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's book called The Coddling of the American Mind that I think paired with this major economic issues, structural issues that we've seen that have stemmed from neoliberalism and before, and that we've been talking about all throughout the evening. I think especially today there is a very particular issue of anti-intellectualism, and I want my own framing of this not to come off as how it could be perceived as, oh, I'm just complaining about the wokes, the SJW culture. But I think Haidt and Lukianoff, they really characterize the situation really well. And so I think the economic issues, the fear, the needing just to get the practical job, the lack of time, energy, paired with this particular moment is just what I see as we're in a very deep crisis of anti-intellectualism. And so in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, they talk about these three kind of untruths that have somewhat taken over the university, both among students, but then the administration as well has kind of adopted that. And those are the untruth of what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. So anything that might, challenge your identity or be an idea that is hard to digest or sit with, we can't hear that, we can't listen to it. Instead, we need to shut it down. And the book is just riddled with examples. And even at our own, more or less middle of nowhere university in Idaho had these problems. Every single person that I knew at a different university, they were almost exactly the same, textbook examples. So it wasn't just a unique thing. But so what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings is another one of these untruths. If something is perceived as, microaggression, racism, whatever, it probably was that. Just trust your gut. And then the world is us versus them. If you're not on our side, you're against us, you're XYZ. And the media really makes that issue worse. And then Haidt and Lukianoff kind of, talk about, where they see these untruths coming from. And Jonathan Haidt just recently came out with a book this year called The Anxious Generation that particularly, not to be kids on their smartphones, but that talks about the issue of the smartphone and social media and this kind of new wave of students and young people. And my mom and John, our cameraman, she's a 5th grade teacher in public schools, and she and all of her teacher colleagues are seeing this just new problem of kids who have grown up on the internet, and just the behavioral issues that have come with that. I think that is another thing that's not just their own case, but lots of teachers that we know. It's just we're in a new time and we're having to kind of deal with it in a different way and understand these conditions. But they do see, the smartphones and the social media dynamics as being some of the cause to these untruths and kind of these changes in behaviors and attitudes on college campuses, especially in some of these more liberal art, sociology, philosophy, English fields. They see the way, Haidt's big thing is, the way that we actually raise children and the freedom that they are given as young kids, being able to build independence and be curious, as opposed to helicopter parenting, this kind of safetyism that has come over the last 30 years, where kids used to be able to, go play outside, come home when it's dark, versus now it's in the US, parents have had child protective services called on them if their 10-year-old is left home alone for half an hour.
So here's an iPad.
Yeah, and then here's an iPad, don't go out into the dangerous world. And so all of these things has just created, like, structurally this really weird, unique situation and cultural messages for this new generation of college students. And so they just, I think, have a hard time talking about some of these harder issues, these issues that need to have rigorous dialogue and discourse. And that's just one more factor that we could all probably have our things to say about it, or we can turn it over and let, the audience ask questions, however we want to do that. But I know that is something that we all see more or less as another thing going on, just on top of the issues that we've talked about, that just really makes it hard to challenge the current dogmatic ideological discourse, especially around issues of race or gender, sexuality, that in a field like sociology that I care about, and I think those are very valid, rigorous fields and topics that absolutely need to be discussed rigorously. It's like this dogma of taking people's feelings and identities and lived experiences into account. Again, there's definitely a place for that, but it's gotten to a point where we're not having the discourse, the dialogues, the contradictions, and the conversations that I think need to happen. And that's another place where I'm seeing an anti-intellectualism from, this intellectualized anti-intellectualism. We've got our definition of what XYZ thing is. If you don't agree, you're a insert Nazi, racist, transphobe, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on.
All right, we're going to do the sort of Q&A segment here, and the cord is not as long as it often was on tour, and so there's a hot seat, and you can either stand in front of it and just talk right here to us, or you could sit here and talk with us. You're welcome to do either. Elliot, come on up, man. You take the hot seat. Come on, Elliot. Come on, yeah. Hi, everybody. The Zoom. We're back. We're I also wanted to say sort of a point of order before I turn it back over to you, Elliot, and that is that everybody here, I think there's always this wildly anti-intellectual expectation that you will have some great question right at the end of the talk. And so, Elliot's someone who's been thinking with us in some sense, for a while now. And so, of course, he's going to have something. But if you don't feel immediately you have a great question, that's not a bug. It's a feature of the mind and how it works. You actually need time to process these things. And so, the best questions usually come 2 weeks later. The best responses come in the form of actual pieces that you might put on your blog post or whatever, right? And so. I just wanted to put that out there. The saying always overflows the said, as Levinas says, right? The saying always overflows the said. And what the world we exist in wants to reduce it to the said and reduce us to what has been said. But the point is I see you all as the ongoing saying. There's so much more that I'm expecting to come from this over the years. And so don't feel all this pressure to do it now. But also, if there's a weird pressure about doing it on the recording, don't worry. We'll be here after the recording. So, yeah. But anyway, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. My first thought when you said what causes anti-intellectualism I was at the back there, and I thought I was super clever. I was like, intellectualism. And then Nina said intellectualism, and then everyone said it. So I was like, they already got that one. I think I have one point I disagree with you on, but at the very end, only at the very end of this. Okay, So first of all, I'm super skeptical about internet culture and groups and efforts and anything that tries to do anything, because it usually really sucks. I know I can't make something that I enjoy. So like I've tried to make some internet groups and I've got people to talk, and ultimately it's like somewhat successful, but ultimately I hate like holding a space when no one pays me. Yeah. So I think this is really good. I think what Cadell does is really good in terms of this is kind of like a new emerging branch of intellectualism, right? Out of a kind of like shaky, what initially seems to me is like a shaky possibility of like internet, right? So I'm a professional sophist, and I don't know if you know what sophistry is. Socrates kind of described it pretty well. So like a sophist is someone, they have like one like idea that they're just obsessed with, and then Socrates comes in and shows why they're like really stupid. And they also take money from people in order to kind of share this idea. So what really helps is a therapy license. Like if you're a philosopher, you should get a therapy license. Why? I'll tell you why, Nina. Because then you get paid to do philosophy. It's that simple. So like my initial project of kind of really hating kind of pop psychology, like I just hate pop psychology because everyone who does it seems really anti-intellectual. Like they do not engage with the history of the philosophy of mind. They don't know anything besides kind of their basic tools, and they're really certain that their reifications of their kind of like whatever they heard last week are like material reality. So there's like a lot of room to be done in the field of psychology, because they're paid to do philosophy, but they don't know how to do philosophy. They know how to like reproduce dominant ideology in a way that kind of seems like mental health maybe. So yeah, things that contribute to anti-intellectualism. My clever thing is not so intellectualism. That's funny. No, but everyone got that. Power, of course, like Nietzsche, right? He says intellectualism is bad because it's really like a disease. Like this is a strong argument against intellectualism, but ultimately I like disagree with it, if only because I like intellectualism. I don't want to live in a world run by which general comes in and just kills everybody in your community and so on. I don't think that's like a good, like, it's like, wouldn't you rather have that world? It's like, no, not really. Money, of course, like you kind of said, the psychotic rich people. I knew somebody who pointed to a Corvette once to his parent, and he said, I want that one. I want that one, Mommy. And he got it for him. That's the richest kid I knew. Like, God bless him. Like, what a guy. Yeah, that was cool. But yeah, he's not an intellectual, I would say, or at least in a philosophical sense. Like he can do probably accounting or something. So lack of money, of course, also, money or lack of money, because we do dialectics here in Theory Underground, right? Being ignorant. So from my own example, my own ignorance, like me wanting to pursue philosophy in America, like I'm like, okay, bourgeois class, American, you'd think I'd be able to find out what philosophy is. But it was actually really, really difficult. Even at UC Santa Cruz, where Donna Haraway, I could have been directly taught by Donna Haraway, but I didn't know who the fuck Donna Haraway was. Didn't know what the Cyborg Manifesto was. I didn't know anything about history of consciousness was an option. I could have like been part of this, but I didn't know what it was. So this existed like location-wise, like right next to me, and I had no way to like engage with it. Like there was no kind of like way to. So I didn't even know what philosophy. And this is kind of before when I was as a millennial, 34-year-old. Like there was no philosophy group online or anything like that. So I had to what's philosophy? French people wearing black, smoking cigarettes. That's philosophy. Kinda. So that's where I started. So it's so I'm trying to read Sartre by myself, and I'm talking to people I played music with, and that's kind of the attempt at philosophy. You do music, but you think you're a philosopher, but you're actually really stupid. That was my experience. And I kind of said to the people I play music with, shouldn't we have deep conversations? I remember this conversation when I was 18. It's shouldn't we have deep conversation? They're like, yeah, you like that sort of thing, don't you, fucking person? You always say shit like that.
Yeah.
So that this was impossible for me. So I was being ignorant. Ignorance is very hard to overcome, actually. And then I think lots of social groups in today's technological world are reliant on centerpieces that are intrinsically anti-intellectual. If there's a massive for instance, just in music, I enjoy a lot of music that is anti-intellectual. I like trance music. It's not really intellectual. It's kind of once in a while, maybe they'll say, but you can't discuss a trance music. What would be the point? But there's lots of stuff that the very kind of core of it is not intellectual. So I think the people should be able to participate in anti-intellectual things. But so first of all, kind of just as what I said at the start is this space is good. People putting in efforts and this kind of burgeoning internet becoming real. It's oh fuck. But this is quality. Cadel's is quality, right? And so this the point I disagree with you on. Like I said, I'm a professional sophist, and you're saying liberal arts should be cut. So here's the thing. Here's the thing, Dave. I understand why that seems like a good idea. You really should encourage a sophist class in general. I would argue you should encourage a sophist class. Not everybody is going to learn philosophy to a great depth. Not everybody wants to. What I do for a living is 4 times a week people look for mental health, and they're just exploring platform capitalism and BetterHelp, and they go, oh, it's a dream journal group, and then they get me to introduce them to mental health. No, but I get great reviews. But but this is the point. The people coming to this place they're not going to go out and become philosophers. They're not going to go there are people that are I want some help, or and there's all these venues where they will approach essentially sophists, or people that get paid to do some intellectual trade, whether that's mental health, whether that's being a liberal arts professor. The first person I ever met IRL who really knew Lacan was an English professor.
It's always the English professor.
It's always the I was well, how does this guy? He was just a random. I was how do you know so much about Lacan? He's oh, of course he just did.
I'm just to clarify though,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there shouldn't be sophist liberal arts professors. I'm just saying that they should be at the library.
Yeah, you're talking about lifelong learning, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is the kind of thing we do at adult education, right? Which is basically...
Oh, your mic's off, actually.
sorry.
Oops.
Sorry, I was saying about lifelong learning and things like adult education, which is essentially professor in the library, I mean, this is basically, it's very, very cheap if you're unemployed or retired, or basically free for 12 weeks. It's not very expensive if you're employed. We get to discuss in these repetitive blocks of exciting shared time. Sorry, I forgot your definition, but this kind of, intellectually stimulating kind of repeated space of thought and freedom.
Energy infused is the
Sorry,
only part that's missing.
energy infused. And if we get enough people, 12 people for 12 weeks or whatever, we can do it and anything, right? And it's amazing. I mean, I can only do it because I have a salary. I was unemployed for a long time after I left academia, which was interesting in and of itself, in a kind of ecstatic, euphoric, slightly vertiginous way. And I had to sell a lot of things. And I almost ended up writing erotica for professors, which I don't recommend. I mean, they sent me some of their suggestions. I was like, oh no, I didn't actually want to know what this was. Anyway, so I have a job with a salary, but I can afford to teach, right? And it's very badly paid. But something like lifelong learning that's open to everybody and has no assessment, no necessary requirements to enter, like this is the most stimulating thing, really. It's people who want to know like a bit of philosophy, like they want to, you know, whatever, anything, philosophy of nature, Plato, whatever's on offer. You know, these things are possible, right?
Yeah. So this is great. This is great. I would just generally, my like hot take is be careful about eliminating sophist positions in the world, like on a broad scale. Even a university, even though they're woke, okay, even though I got a paperback from the male gaze at UC Santa Cruz, boo, they're woke. No, they gave me my paperback on the male gaze. They said, write an essay about this woman. There she is. She's striding, and there are the men. They're hunched. They're taking pictures of her. They're sick. Tell me about it. Tell me what I just told you. And so I said, well, it kind of seems, if you think about it, that the men are all really hunched, and the woman's kind of just like chilling, striving, and they're all like, she's like the center, like it seems like she's in power. And they gave me a D, and they wrote missed the point. They wrote missed the point. I said, you bastard. Like, and then I said, we didn't. This was before we had. I think woke wasn't a word when I got this back, so I didn't quite know it was happening. But I did know that if I said what I thought, people would hurt me. And this is like, I think before, like, this is like why woke is like a signifier, because I think people realize that if you simply share your opinions, sometimes someone will hurt you. And so you have to figure out exactly how are you going to participate in the world, right? So yeah, anti-intellectualism, intellectuals, they'll get you every time, right? Like they'll fucking just they're really good at crushing intellectual discussion. So I think like also this group that is for intellectualism in general, I initially very hesitant to like engage with right-wing people, quote unquote. I know this is like maybe woke resonance or whatever, but like I've kind of recently thought like, how much do I like thinking like itself? Like how much do I like being an intellectual? Do I like it more than politics? And like I kind of had this like realization. Oi! Like fuck off! Right, sorry everyone.
I thought it was the break. We were all waiting for the break. It didn't come.
Oh fuck! No, you shouldn't do that in England. I forgot we were in England.
Or are they actually throwing stuff? Okay.
Sorry, sometimes I forget we're in England.
The people next door don't. There are people in the neighborhood who don't like this place existing, so it's not a joke, you know.
No, it's not.
Some hooligan teens, though.
Oh, it's all good.
And they're called yobs, and you shouldn't tell them to fuck off, actually. Anyway. Where was I?
I saw Green Street Hooligan, so I know all about it.
Well, we'll invite some other people. Yeah, give me 1 second though before you kick me out here. I know. Give me one.
Okay.
I had
closing
like.
thought.
Oh, I had one more point. Anti-intellectualism, administrative power. That's another thing that'll get you.
Yeah, he's exercising.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Elliot.
I did have one more thing.
This gentleman right there.
Here you go.
So I sit here. So I actually haven't formulated a proper question, but I'll get to one at the end. So the universities. So I went to, last year I graduated from, Central St. Martin's, the prestigious art school, and a master's. And I went there initially going, oh, right, I really care about this thing like social justice, which I thought was, like you were discussing, stuff like poverty, class, etc. But then I found out pretty quickly, no, that's not anything to do with it, right? So then I was like, oh, why the fuck is that not the case? That's not the case, right? So then I started looking into it. I did my whole second year major project around the idea of pointless jobs, bullshit jobs. So I'd go along, I made a cart, I went along and started to talk to different people, say, you know about this, there's these jobs that don't need to really exist, it's like 40% of them, they're pointless, etc. And loads of the students would come up to me and, yeah, that's great. The academic staff would be like, yep, that's great, and they would actually encourage me and say, yeah, more, there's more. And then it'll go then to the admin. And this is where it came to, that sort of comes to me, it's like, oh, well, there's a lot of the admin staff have all these sort of pointless jobs, and it's largely about creating more work for the others. And a lot of these things about that other type of social justice, critical social justice, which is completely different, which I believe is largely about maintaining class. It's got very little to do with actually, it's actually there to maintain class differences. But anyway, my sort of conclusion is much of this is coming from not the students, as is often reported in the media, not even from the academics, because many of the academics were saying the same thing to me, and they were like encouraging me, saying, yeah, this goes up on that floor over there. And it comes from largely sort of the admin. So when you have that sort of stranglehold of the institutions, admin staff, which is like maybe a third of it, is like, okay, how can we actually then change the institutions? These ideas, stuff like luxury beliefs, etc. Do we reform them, close them down, establish new ones, or is just the tide starting to sort of turn, or is it like these discussions here that sort of open it up?
I think there's an element of like reality catches up with to fantasy eventually. So, in psychoanalysis, it's a question of how desires function and how we relate to fantasy, and fantasy being this important driving factor of human life. And in some ways it animates life, in some ways, we act against our own best interest. And I do think that we live in a materially real universe. Because of the structure of the universe, we end up being marked by lack and having sort of a not at oneness with ourselves. And this is where sort of fantasy comes in to sort of deal with this trauma of the nothing that is us. But eventually reality does catch up with us. So I do wonder, we've talked about, is there a political potential in this overproduction of the elite where people have been awoken to thinking in a sense, and material reality does catch up eventually. I mean, yeah, the world has to keep turning at a certain point. So I don't know whether, I'm always saying, it's the end of this, or finally we're going to be, but it does seem to take a long time. But I do think there is a sort of a catch-up point eventually. I don't know.
I think you are kind of right, and it gave me a lot of faith that actually a lot of the academic staff actually kind of saw through that, and actually quite a few students, like most of them, didn't actually follow all of that sort of thing. There's just a large number that just go with it, but they just can't express themselves through fear.
Really quick question. What was your name?
Charles,
thank you so much. So just double checking. You said, was this like at the university you were doing this research, or is that what?
Yeah, while studying, yeah.
Okay, and so you're just kind of like you're on this line of research related to bullshit jobs.
Yeah.
And
I
was
did
this
two-year masters, and it was a whole year that I spent on one project focused around, because it's like a arts and design course.
Yeah.
Part of it is like the research purely on the theory, then it's the implementation of it.
So like Graeber then.
It's basically based on Graeber's work.
Are you so? And he
some sort of variation that I took. I was more like questioning it, but
his approach was just to say, like, if people find it unfulfilling and say that they think that it's pointless, then he's going to go with that and basically trust them on that.
That's largely his definition. Yeah.
Did you have a different approach to figuring out if someone's job is bullshit?
No, that's largely what I went off his definition, and I wasn't too polemical as in forcing it on people. It was almost like demonstrating this is the idea. What do you think about it?
Yeah. That's great. Cool. I'm just curious about that because I think it's one of the most important questions in the world right now. Mm-hmm. The first is like how to automate and redistribute what can't be automated from the worst jobs that are necessary, and then the other one is how to get rid of the bullshit jobs. So
yeah. This was a question sort of I was sort of asking, and I largely think a lot of bullshit jobs is like recreating the middle class or upper middle class. Because I think from my experience of being there, there's a lot of the upper middle class wanting to just kick down on the working class, and lower middle class saying, you don't come here, right?
Thank you, Charles.
Through cultural reasons, luxury briefs, etc.
Thank you, Charles.
I think high-skilled, fulfilling jobs are essentially, in my opinion, maybe this puts me in the category of someone who's an economic masochist in the sense that I think work can be fulfilling, but that sort of job that actually is high-paid and fulfilling is essentially a luxury good, and that's why people really want to hold on to those jobs, and there are all sorts of ideologies around them. And actually, one of the things you find is that almost overwork is a status symbol among the super wealthy. You see all these jokes that they're doing work while they're on their elliptical or whatever. But one of the problems with this is that, and there was a really good article about this in Financial Times at the beginning of this year, is that essentially a lot of the super wealthy billionaire venture capitalist class are very illiterate. There was an article about how few books they read, and this is makes them sort of a distinct class. And I think social media's in a certain way been one of the good things about social media has been very demotic. It's sort of revealed how both the today's academic elite as well as the business elite are actually not that much more intelligent than the ordinary person at all, with regards to all these things. But
Kurzweil is proof of this, yeah.
Yeah. But one other thing that's related to that is that there's essentially this content treadmill is, so in the 1970s there was something called the Burt J thesis by later went on to become the Director General of the BBC, John Burt, and Peter J, who is Callahan's son. He wrote the line in the speech 1976 about that option no longer exists, about how social democracy was not going to be possible anymore. But anyway, this thesis basically said that within television news media, the very format of the media creates a bias, basically prevents people from understanding the world for various reasons. But I believe today there's a new bias in understanding created by podcasts and social media. And the main reason is that because of the algorithmic design, there is essentially no discipline to what comes next after one thing beyond essentially hedonism or preference. So one challenge with this is, of course, maybe a channel like you're on YouTube. I assume you're probably on all the other podcast platforms. Is so okay. You get loaded in, and then up next comes some, I don't know, therapy bullshit or some other weird thing. And oftentimes, actually, there is no necessarily I was going to say the other two sophistic professions today are public relations and journalism. Which I'm a journalist. I was a journalist. These are well known to be sophistic professions. But I'm not even saying that necessarily something that's not written by a PhD or whatever is or something that's not theory is necessarily bad. There probably are elements of some of these things that are actually good. You were saying you were reading some of these self-help books or whatever, you were taking them seriously. The problem is without being integrated into some sort of curriculum or some sort of schedule in any way, there's no logic to any of that. So I was wondering, just you as really theorists, what are you thinking about, if you're thinking about it at all? Maybe, I don't know, putting curricula really online to understand these things.
That's fucking amazing. Yeah. I'll let Nance lead off here. You go ahead and take it. And what was your name? Hal, thank you. Yeah, Nance will lead off, and then
to jokingly respond to that, that's why we do 17-hour live streams on the YouTube channel. But no, I think my personal experience being a worker / content consumer, my algorithm was all over the place. It was skateboarding and boobs and ice cream and video games and all kinds of shit. And then when I started seriously studying, I will sit down daily for 20 minutes in a small room with a door and a porcelain seat and scroll for that. And then it's skateboarding and boobs and all the other stuff. But throughout the rest of the day, I have had to hack my brain to not rely on the algorithm, because it is impossible to think when you're constantly like in this like schizophrenic, like, oh, here's this. But when you fill up the void that you're trying to cover over with all that bullshit content, then I do think it is possible to resist the allure of the algorithm.
Yeah, and I feel like the people who listen to a lot of podcasts and are almost encyclopedic about it, like, it's like, okay, man, like you just know about a lot of podcasts. Like that's what it feels like. It's like you are a good consumer of podcasts. Like you could also collect Lego that you never built. Like that's cool too. Whatever, it's just collecting. So then the question is like, can it go from that to something more? And I think the goal here is to show that it can. Now the question is how, and how can we make it more so? And he said it was a joke, but it's for real. Like if a person is following us alongside like a billion other things on YouTube, and then they see this live stream and they say, oh, let's jump in on it. And we're having an interview with Nina or Helen or Cadell or Ted, who is in the back of the room. What's up, Ted? He's a little late, but it's Ted Reese, everybody. He's very exciting. We had, long-time friend of the channel. He's been on several times, and he's also in the Underground Theory book. The point is like they drop in on it, and then they're like, oh, well, that's interesting. Well, yeah, it's not just interesting. Everything on the internet's interesting if you're looking at it. Potentially, probably, it's interesting. The point is for that to not be all. That's the hook, and on the other side of it is a container. I think I get this language from Cadell, but we were both talking about how it's just flows and chaos and algorithms, and our goal, our struggle as professors trying to do this thing outside of the academy is to not get captured by the attention economy, not give in to the tendencies of the attention economy, and more importantly, to create walls, create containers, to basically say, okay, yeah, it's infinite scroll and everyone's following different stuff outside these walls, but in this space, this is not just like every other space on the internet. This space is dedicated to this subject matter, this thinker, this text, these people. And so that is the other step. I feel like that is the necessary step, is some kind of, I call it a container, but this is a container. It's not to say you guys can't leave, like it's not the compound where you can't leave or whatever, but like we have some time between us. The fact is we chose to all be here right now, and so there was a subject matter, we've more or less stuck with it, and so we've all committed to being here and thinking about this subject matter together, which means that we can return to it in the future. First of all, because it will be published online. And second of all, because it's an ongoing conversation. There's an anthology on this topic coming out at the end of this year with pieces by participants. And so that's the other, it's just like, it can't stop at the podcast. It can't stop at the YouTube. And in fact, if it's dependent on those things, it's probably not going anywhere. But if it can be pipelined into these actual learning spaces that do have some kind of accountability structure, some kind of potential recognition that can be earned, some kind of mentorship and expertise present, then you can go from just burning out on all this stuff, being overwhelmed, but ultimately curious and entertaining yourself as a consumer, to rolling up your sleeves and taking on challenges just because it's better than just scrolling. Yeah. All right, we've got one more here.
Hello, sorry, the name's Paul. Many decades ago, well, not many decades, a few decades ago, I listened to Joseph Beuys talk, and he was a German pilot in the Luftwaffe, and he crashed. You probably know the story. And he became an artist, and he talked about democracy, and everyone expected him to talk about art. And my question is, basically, from that, I deduced after many years of studying, reading, that the problem, I think, is language to a large extent. So like Orwell, doublespeak, it's the abduction of language. And it's particularly democracy and, for me, peer review. Because I wrote an idea to open access publishing. And they weren't particularly interested by it, but there was just loads of new publishers who wanted to do open access publishing. but the idea, I felt as if your peers could do work in a more democratic way in the subject that interests them. There could be a means of what you were talking about, though, to actually get recognition and advance a subject. And so I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. And, yeah, that's it. Right.
I think the point about the fact is that pretty much everybody is more intelligent than we're supposed to think, right? Like this kind of capacity to think and to reason. Everybody has reasons. We may not agree with them. That's the point. But basically, Spinoza says man thinks, right? This is a fundamental axiom. And I think I was thinking a lot during this whole conversation of this great book by Alfred Zonrettel called Intellectual and Manual Labor, which is a very interesting book. And he talks about precisely the kind of emergence of abstract thought, which he relates to the introduction of kind of exchange in the form of money, and that it's this kind of abstraction that permits the kind of developments in abstract thought. But because the kind of binary thinking of the West always ends up being a hierarchy, then intellectual labor then gets positioned above manual labor, precisely in the way that you're talking about, the kind of denigration of practical work. And, you know, my brother is a builder, and he left school at 16, and we have conversations about these things often. And he once said to me quite correctly, "You're paid to make people unhappy." And I thought, yes, that's actually one of the best definitions of what I've done in my life that I can think of. My brother actually helps people. He fixes their houses and their plumbing and, you know, gives them somewhere to live. So I think we have to understand that there is a kind of, I don't know how to put it, like a huge tension, right, at the heart of whatever we think democracy might look like, in the form of freedom, having the time to think collectively, to study, but at the same time, it's the how to overcome this kind of hierarchical kind of denigration that persists, right, as we see in the kind of bureaucratic PMC. And I suppose it's like this difference between, like, to go back to Eliot's thing, like ignorance and stupidity, right? Knowing that one is ignorant is actually like the beginning of understanding, as the Greeks understood as well. But stupidity is often like chosen, right? I think that many people in the middle class, institutionalized middle class, have chosen a kind of stupidity, right? In the sense that they don't want to think. They know that thinking about certain things is actually dangerous and will jeopardize their position. And they have to cling on to their job for fear of falling into the working class, which would be the worst thing ever. You know, they wouldn't want to have a manual labor job at all, right? And therefore they have to project this kind of fear onto those people who do, in fact, all of the useful work, you know. And I think how to kind of democratize thought has to involve this kind of I don't know, humility, embrace of a certain kind of ignorance, which we all have. Like, no matter how many books I read in my life, it's never going to be as many as the ones in my flat even, or in my bedroom. I sleep next to my books, which is a really bad idea. Don't do this. Because every day I wake up and I think, fuck, you know. Anyway.
I want to allow everyone else here to say a closing thought, and I just will say, like, one of the things that I've written down that I was thinking maybe I'll bring it up, maybe I won't, is elitist populism right now, and specialist generalism, these are at a certain level oppositions, right? There's an opposition between elitism and populism, and there's also an opposition between specialization and being a generalist. And these things are only opposed because of the society being structured in the way that it is, the division of labor being what it is. It is what it is. It's good and bad, whatever. But we are in a sort of post-specialization era. The gigification of the economy and everything is pointing in a direction where, yeah, people are learning. Oh, I can dive into that, and I can dive into this, and I can learn this, and I can learn that. And I think that democratizes knowledge in a way. But the worst thing about democracy is this idea of just like, oh, well, then that just means that everyone will have a voice. And and it means, and this leveling effect comes with it. And I just think that Nietzsche's right as far as he goes. And the left that wasn't able to sit with Nietzsche is the left I wouldn't want to sit with, right? And like, just generally speaking, it's like very, very, it's just like, oh yeah, well, everyone should just be able to have a voice. Well, I think that education is about people who've spent a lot of time working on something being able to share their enthusiasm and knowledge. And so democracy is hopefully, and populism as well, is about having the ability to throw oneself up against like higher standards, as opposed to those standards being lowered so that everyone can supposedly get the fruits of it. But the thing is, everyone can't have the fruits of it when those have been lowered. And so that's what I would call pseudo-populism. And I think there's a lot of pseudo-populism being rolled out by professors who don't want to read books and just want to flip the classroom and make the students teach them, and their students aren't prepared to teach them. And so ultimately they're all just sitting there jerking each other off, and it's a waste of time and money. And I don't think anything that you're talking about necessarily leads to that. But I am just saying that with the word democracy, because it has these different conflicting meanings, it's a big concern, and it's something that we take really seriously here at Theory Underground, at least. And so thank you for that question. Anyone else want to just say anything in close here? Thank you, Pierre. This was amazing. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
So in my thanks, I'm going to try to lower the tone down, because particularly as Hal and Nina were speaking, I somehow remembered an episode of The Simpsons, or at least a formed incorrect memory of The Simpsons. There's an episode in which Lisa discovers that she's not genetically connected to the family, and somehow she's very clever because of this. She's not weighed down by this bad gene pool, and she becomes a genius. She's top of the school, she's top of absolutely everything, yet everyone is completely alienated by her. She can't, Marge doesn't understand her, and she makes these terrible decisions to retreat, to have some kind of operation. I'm mixing the episodes, but you get the idea. She can have this reversed. She can come back to being just a little bit clever than everyone else for dramatic purposes, but not so clever as to dispense unhappiness to herself. And she makes this impassioned plea, trying to, in her last moment, to explain to camera for The Simpsons, the Springfield News Channel, to explain that she's just experienced something and how heartbreaking it is to want to give it up for her fellow human beings. And the TV channel's sign of it, little girl likes her brain. Don't know if this was worth the long build-up. So discharge. Thank you so much for being here. I have to say a couple of crude things. These projects, neither mine nor David's, nor anyone else's, run on nothing. It's lovely to be here, but now you need to go and get some books. The Underground Theory anthology is there. David's Timenergy, and Nina's latest book is also there. Well, 2 years. You can write another one for next time, which is next week. We're meeting next week. Come back. We're going to do things a bit like this. We're going to do a lot of very different things as well. I know some of you are coming back already next week for our seminar on the history of aesthetics. I think we're going to do, together with Nina, a seminar on iconoclasm. That's commitment. There we go. So come again. Other than that, thank you all so much. I want to thank Alfie for introducing David. I want to thank Benjamin for running the show. And finally, our wonderful guests, Nina, Helen, Bryce, David, and Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we can stick around for another drink's worth, so the real work can happen. Yeah, the real work happens.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down Seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey Seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button. Subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful Patreon people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you. Oh, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.